What's up, everybody? Thanks to anyone joining live on today. What's the holiday again? Civic Holiday.
Civic Holiday. It has another name in Toronto, but we won't use it. The guy is canceled, but we can't use
Oh,
that name. Yeah. It's like one of the historical figures in Ontario who did
is
some
it
bad things.
Dundas?
No, different guy, but in the same vein.
Uh,
Let's just say
okay.
there's a street in downtown Toronto that's named after him near Roy Thompson Hall, and I'll leave it at that
All right. Okay. So that's the exercise for the listener, I
for
guess.
the listener. Yeah.
Well, thanks for joining me. Ryan's here, as everyone can see. It's not Brian.
Hey, everybody. This is gonna be great. Looking forward to this.
Yeah, me too. All right. I guess we could just start the show then.
Let's do it.
Um, oh, I didn't press the button. Okay, I'm just gonna wait for it to get to 1 minute on the recording, and then I'll start my tracking. Andrea's here. Hey, Andrea, how's it going? One of your big patrons. I could hear, by the way, just so you know, your clicks, but I guess you'll just mute yourself when you're clicking around.
Yeah,
Or
I won't need to click all that much. I'm just getting set up here.
yeah, cool. All right, so shall we?
Yeah, go for it.
All right. Yeah! Yes! Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the Keeping Karlsson Fantasy Hockey Podcast, the longest running fantasy hockey podcast in the world, hosted by a guy who is really hoping that Albert Schmitz is not just a peripherals guy, because I traded for him in both of my Dynasty leagues. I'm your host, Yolan Dubrovsky, and with me this week, it's not my regular co-host Brian. He is on vacation, but instead I've got a ringer. I've got a prospect expert. You know him from and so many things, Short Shifts and Matchup Maximizer on our network. He's been on the Fantasy Hockey Life podcast, of course, writer for Dauber Hockey. It's Ryan Downey. Ryan, how's it going?
Hey, Elon. Hey, everybody. It's great to be back on the Keeping Karlsson airways. I think it's probably been, like 4 or 5 months, I guess, since I made my last Short Shifts appearance. So happy to be here and happy to talk about one of my favorite topics, the 2026 NHL entry draft.
Has it really been that long, man? This summer has really been flying by,
Yeah.
I guess. Yeah, because I guess we stopped Short Shifts before the NHL playoffs. Yeah, well, you joined the Dynasty League, the Keeping Karlsson Dynasty League, the team that Brian and I were doing, and we're now Brylan. And I kind of, I don't want to say I screwed you over, but I kind of didn't give you something that you would have enjoyed because you came to join the team, and it was a team that ended up with only one pick in the draft, and it was the 5th round, 20th pick, 100th overall. So I was like feeling bad for you, a guy who's done so much research into the draft. We ended up making some trades to pick up some picks along the way, and we'll discuss it as we go. But yeah, the plan for this week's episode is I still haven't done it yet. You know, Brian and I got right into all the excitement of free agency, and definitely check out those last 3 episodes. It was a 3-parter covering every single NHL team and all the transactions they made and looking from a fantasy perspective of who we think this helps or hurts. So that was a lot of fun. But then, of course, we still like to do an episode looking at the draft, the actual entry draft, seeing if any of these players, and also that's from a fantasy perspective. Obviously, there's lots of podcasts you could listen to talk about which teams drafted which players and whether it was smart for the team or not, and if that's going to help the team down the road. But we want to look from fantasy, which of these players are going to be people we're going to want to draft in our dynasty leagues, and even people that we're going to want to keep an eye on in our 1-year leagues, maybe as soon as next year. So it's a show I like to do every year, and we've got Ryan here, and we're just going to go through all the big names from the 2026 entry draft. And Ryan's done a ton of research, and he'll tell us who is a serious player and who's someone we can just totally forget about. So I'm super excited. Ryan, how many dynasty leagues have you drafted for now with this knowledge that you have? Reasons why you like or don't like a player, as I'm sure you will. All right, why don't we just get started? I'm thinking we'll just go through the actual draft in the order that they got taken. As we go through, we can talk about, I've got the draft results for our Keeping Karlsson Dynasty League up so we can see where things diverged. Obviously, some players are more valuable IRL, as we say, than for fantasy. And I'm sure a lot of these players, I'm again hoping Albert Schmitz isn't one of them, though he did fall a lot farther than 5th overall in both of my Dynasty League drafts, triggering me to be like, I got to trade for this pick. This is value. We traded for the 12th overall pick to get Albert Schmitz in the Keeping Karlsson League. We'll get there. But okay, let's start at the top. Gavin McKenna, obviously, this was not a surprise. The Leafs took the guy who people have been talking about for 2-3 years now as the 2026 gem of the draft. Maybe there were points somewhat recently where people were discussing if maybe McKenna shouldn't be 1st overall. I know there was, what was it? One of the beat writers from The Athletic.
McKenna, a lot of folks will remember, of course, very highly publicized. He had an incident in a bar. He got in trouble with the law for a short time there. I think it's all been mostly resolved at this point. I think some of the charges have been withdrawn. Don't hold me to that, but I don't think that there's anything that will impact him playing this season. But it was around that time in February, after that Penn State outdoor game, where things really started to turn for McKenna kind of in a positive direction. Because up to that point, like you're saying, there were a lot of people who were saying, I don't know, like he made the transition to college. He didn't quite look as spectacular as he did when he was dominating in junior. He had taken some time to make that transition. And it's around that time, I think, where he got his you-know-what together and just started really showing us what he can do from a playmaking standpoint. And I was certainly one of those people, Elon, that was down on Gavin McKenna. And I thought, well, geez, as a Toronto Maple Leafs fan, I won't even need to think about this guy anyways, because there's no chance Toronto is going to be picking at that point in the draft. There is just no chance. We're going to lose our pick to Boston. Then, lo and behold, lottery luck smileth upon the Toronto Maple Leafs, and they end up with the first overall. And I think Gavin McKenna was the obvious choice for them. Just to share a couple of the comps that are floating around out there, Elon, and none of these will be particularly surprising to you, but maybe to some of the listeners. We've got a comp from elite prospects of Patrick Kane or Nikita Kucherov. Those are popular names that go at the top. Chris Peters of Flow Hockey had Artemi Panarin as a comp for Gavin McKenna. If the Leafs get any version of Panarin, Kane, or Kucherov, they will be very, very happy with this pick. And so it's a huge boon to their kind of retool on the fly efforts, and he will be an exciting asset, I think, in fantasy as well.
Yeah, well, I know Leafs fans are just hoping a comp could maybe be Mitch Marner, if not in stylistic play, but like at least in terms of like the production, because obviously the Leafs seem to miss him quite a bit. Austin Matthews seemed to miss having Mitch Marner. I know for fantasy, as someone who drafted Austin Matthews, I definitely didn't realize when I was drafting him that I was getting a different version of the guy that doesn't play with Mitch Marner. So what do you think for like even 1 year leagues? McKenna's signed as the LC. He's going to be on the Leafs next year. I think most people have him pegged to like be on the top line or the second line. He's going to be on the wing of either Matthews or Tavares, I'd assume, and I'm kind of guessing that it'll be with Matthews at least to start. I guess there's the question of the power play, which is interesting to me because we do kind of have 4 forwards there that seem locked in Matthews, Tavares, Nylander, and Matthew Nyes. So McKenna would have to bump one of those forwards. I'm curious to get your take. We're doing a couple drafts actually the deadline is at the end of this month. So just a heads up that make sure you don't miss it. Go to kkupfl.com. If you're a patron, we have a link right on our Discord. That's our Keeping Karlsson League where we run every year. And we're really excited to get that going. And I can't believe it's already August. So we're going to start that soon. But yeah, so for people who are going to be drafting, and we've got mock drafts going. I should bring up the mock draft results. I can let you know after you're done talking where McKenna's been going in our mocks. But yeah, what do you think for like very short term for next season? Is McKenna going to be 60 plus points, Calder candidate, or do you think there might be a learning curve here?
Yeah, I don't think there'll be much of a learning curve beyond the usual learning curve that is a rookie entering the NHL. Gavin McKenna is a special offensive talent, and he will not be relied upon in the same way that Mitch Marner was with the defensive responsibilities. And actually, I don't think, Elon, that anyone on that top line is going to be relied upon for any kind of defensive responsibilities. Obviously, you have Austin Matthews, who's one of the great two-way centers in the game. I think the Leafs will decide that is enough for their top line. Further to your point of saying that you were drafting Matthews last year, expecting him to be the Matthews, perhaps the 60-goal Matthews, and then for a number of reasons, including Mitch Marner moving on to Vegas, he wasn't. I think one of the key reasons there as well is that Craig Berube didn't have anyone to rely on defensively in that lineup, and so that's why Austin Matthews got a lot of, I think, D-zone starts and didn't get the opportunity as well in the offensive zone as much as perhaps his drafters would have hoped. And so how does that change now? They've got Jim Hiller in the fold as the coach, and he has been upfront in a number of interviews at this point saying he is going to devise a system with the players that caters to their strengths. And so you're going to see a lot of Austin Matthews in the offensive zone. You're going to see a lot of John Tavares in the offensive zone. So no matter which line Gavin McKenna ends up on, and it could be Matthews, Nyes, McKenna, it could be McKenna, Nylander, Tavares, whichever kind of permutation of that McKenna gets to be a part of, he's got great shooters to play with. And so he will be able to show us a little bit of his offensive wizardry and the playmaking that he is well known for. And he actually is not afraid either of shooting it himself. He can get himself into scoring positions and be a part of the unit within the cycle as well. So I think Gavin McKenna, certainly you're going to see something close to perhaps Ivan Demidov from this past season. I'm expecting something around 60 points with maybe 25 to 30 points of that being power play. And let's talk about the power play while we're on that topic. You mentioned, yes, that there are those 4 forwards that are kind of entrenched in those roles. I don't see a world where John Tavares stays there forever. And I think also in a world where they have Matthew Nyes who can set up in the front of the net, and they've got Nylander and Matthews on the flank, it would make sense to me to have someone like Gavin McKenna in the bumper just to kind of distribute between them. Or maybe you put Matthews in the shooting position in the bumper and put McKenna on the flank as well. The Leafs have had a lot of success in the past with a formation of power play where the players rotate as well. And I think this particular group of players, Tavares excluded, would be well suited to that. Like I could see a formation where they have Nylander, Matthews, and McKenna all switching places and keeping Matthew Nyes in front of the net to cause chaos there. So I really do think that you'll see McKenna on the top power play. If not right at the beginning of the season, they'll certainly try it at some point. And I think he'll probably stick there for the bulk of the season and get about 25 power play points. That's about what Demidov got this year. I think he had 27. And so I think certainly with the offensive firepower that Toronto has and the commitment to offensive excellence that Jim Hiller is going to bring as a result of consulting with these players and finding the style that works best for them, I do think we're going to see a Gavin McKenna that's 60 points-ish. So maybe you draft him where you drafted Ivan Demidov. But why don't you tell us, Elon, where's he going in the mocks right now?
Yeah, I'm seeing here a mock ADP of around 130. So to put that in perspective, just after a Sam Bennett, a Vincent Trocheck, I'm looking just forwards here. Right after Gavin McKenna, there's guys like Evgeny Malkin, JJ Paterka, William Eklund, Brad Marchand. So that territory of still guys that you're drafting, expecting to keep on your roster all season, but people aren't going too nuts. I know some people are drafting Demidov super high last year. He did have that cup of coffee the year before where he looked decent. So that'll be fun. I guess a side note there is buyer beware on John Tavares because he becomes a lot less interesting, obviously, if he's not getting top power play time. But okay, I guess we should move on from the first overall pick. He was the first pick in both of my dynasty leagues, no surprises. And also here's the guy who was the second overall pick in both of my dynasties, and he also went second overall in real life. Ivar Stenberg goes to the San Jose Sharks. I guess they sort of telegraphed this when they traded William Eklund away to the Sens for a pick, which they ended up using later on to get Keaton Verhoff, who we'll get to in a bit. But I guess they were like, we don't need Eklund. We're getting Stenberg, a winger who is super high pedigree, coming off a great season, as you'd expect for someone getting drafted this high, 51 points in 29 games in this Sweden league, and a whole bunch of other. You look at Puckpedia, it's like Stenberg played in a lot of different tournaments and a lot of different games over this past season, and I guess he's done well in all of them. This is another slam dunk gem of a player that we expect to be a star in the league.
Yeah, absolutely. I really do think that Stenberg is going to be a name we're talking about for a long time in fantasy circles. As it stands for this coming year, I'm a little bearish on him. I think he's great. Don't get me wrong. I just think it really depends on where in the roster he lands and if he gets that top power play time. I think a lot of people would say, oh, he's just going to replace Eklund's deployment. But Eklund didn't spend all of his time playing with Macklin Celebrini. There was a lot of times where Eklund was playing on the second line, playing on the third line with Michael Misa. He was not guaranteed that top power play all the time. I think he had somewhere around 55%, 60%. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but it's not like Eklund was a primo deploymento like offensive player all the time with San Jose. So it really depends where Stenberg is going to land. I would be comfortable drafting him sometime after McKenna, maybe a round or two, certainly in the same neighborhood. I do think his play style is very translatable to the league. Like the way that he plays is a bit more NHL ready than Gavin McKenna, kind of from an all around standpoint. I would trust him in the defensive zone, for instance. And so that's why I wouldn't be surprised at all to see him playing with Michael Misa in that kind of, second line, perhaps taking on some more challenging matchups than the kind of Macklin Celebrini line. I could really see like a Macklin Celebrini with Will Smith and a Chernyshov line, first line, really popping, like giving you what you want from an offensive standpoint. And then you get the second line, and maybe it's Misa with one of those big guys. It could be Marchment, it could be Sherwood. And then you have Stenberg, doing some of the more defensively responsible things on that line. I kind of see Stenberg as like a Jake Gensel kind of guy, and Gensel took maybe a year or two before becoming Jake Gensel that we know and love and drafted, and drafted pretty high in the Cupful and traded assets for in the Cupful like we did this past summer, Elon. So I think certainly you can see that kind of trajectory for Stenberg. But it really does depend where he lands in the lineup. If he lands on that first line with Macklin Celebrini, I mean, the sky's the limit.
Right, of course. So for 1 year leagues, yeah, there's a lot of different options of what San Jose could do there. So you have to be a little bit wary. Long term, I got to ask, San Jose just accumulating all of these super exciting guys. Obviously, Celebrini now locked in. He's going to be getting 18.5 or 18.6, 18.8, I think it was, mil for the next 5 seasons after he finishes his ELC. He's obviously their top guy. After that, I'm curious to get an updated ranking here, not for next season, like for just like long term, which prospect would you want the most to the least? Will Smith, Ivar Stenberg, Michael Misa. Is that okay? Putting you on the spot, asking you to rank those 3 guys?
Definitely, yeah. It's kind of an interesting situation because they're all still pretty early in their careers, right? And they were all drafted really high with really high upside, all within the certainly in the top 10. And you have Misa who went second, you have Stenberg who went second, and so I'm pretty high on Misa personally. I think he takes a big step this year. I think he's a guy that they're going to continue to put in positions to succeed. But I do think that they're going to ask of him to be a bit more defensively responsible. He does have that skill set to be that all-around center. And I often thought of Jonathan Taves when it came to Michael Misa. Never really, he has a couple of those point per game seasons for sure, but he's going to have a lot more value as an all-around player rather than a fantasy player. Will Smith, I think that he's probably the guy I would go for first, just because of the proximity to Celebrini. I really do think he's going to get a lot of time with him, and I think he'll be the beneficiary, him and Chernyshov. So I think I'm probably going to go Smith first, and then I probably have to put them in a tier together, the 2 second overall guys, Stenberg and Misa. If I had to edge one of them out, I think I'd probably go with Stenberg just because he has the offensive tools that Misa does have, but maybe in the stronger supply. So it's close between Misa and Stenberg, but I think I'd probably edge Stenberg.
Interesting. Okay, yeah. So exciting team of the Sharks. We haven't even gotten to the 2 defensemen that they drafted in this draft. So we'll get to them.
We will.
Obviously, big year for the San Jose Sharks. If you're a Sharks fan, we'll find out if this is the season they're actually an exciting team in the NHL, and not just with the prospects. Of course, Brian and I talked about how they got Jacob Trouba and Darnell Nurse in the offseason. Brian looked at some underlying stats that indicate that Jacob Trouba is apparently the worst player of all time. We'll see about how Nurse and Trouba translate there. But I think the Sharks are just such a fun team in general. Like, I'm excited to watch their games just to see like all the young, highest pedigree prospect forwards, and then just old veteran bangers league champion like defensemen with Nurse and Trouba, who generally are getting like 200 hits or whatever. So I think an Orlov, like just the older defenseman running things.
Well, Elon, while we're talking about the Sharks, why don't we have that conversation about the defense? We don't need to necessarily go in order here. And sure. I think, when it comes to, like you said, and this is a point that I think you've been making a lot of the summer, that the San Jose Sharks have to start to make an effort to engage with their fan base. And part of that involves bringing in defensemen who can play defense, right? The team did great last season on the offensive side of the puck, but they were an absolute travesty when it came to NHL level defense. And so, of course, here comes the impetus to make these trades and draft guys like Keaton Verhoff and Ryan Lynn, which I'll get into in a second. But then you have the free agent signing of Jacob Trouba and the trade for Darnell Nurse, the trade of Muka Madulin, who was an NHL defenseman, and I'm using that kind of in quotes because he's not a super high upside kind of guy. And he's going to Edmonton, where he'll probably be a 6'7" kind of guy. So you have a really bad defensive core that has now been augmented by these 2 veterans brought in. And these 2 veterans, if you look at them, they each kind of encapsulate little bits of what I think they're hoping some of their guys like Keaton Verhoff can learn, right? Keaton Verhoff, one of the guys who, you could really look at him and you could say, oh, I can see a bit of Darnell Nurse in that guy. Maybe a bit more offensive upside. You have some of the same kind of challenges from a vision standpoint that Verhoff has compared to a Nurse. I think a lot of people would say the biggest knock on Darnell Nurse's decision-making, specifically kind of in transition. Verhoff is a little better in transition, but when he kind of gets into that panic moment I think you do have some troubles that kind of arise to the forefront with Verhoff. And I think those were troubles that were really well displayed in his 17-year-old season in the NCAA. And actually, Elon, that's a sentence that 2-3 years ago we would not be saying, a 17-year-old season in the NCAA.
Right.
This is a huge change in the landscape for the development model for prospect development for the NHL. Keaton Verhoff got to make the decision this year to go and play against men. Some of these guys are 23, 24 years old and have been playing against men for 4 or 5 seasons, right? And Verhoff is a 17-year-old kid coming in, and he was third in ice time on University of North Dakota right away. You know, this was the role that the team determined that he had earned based on the level of his play. And to come in as a 17-year-old, and I think also it shows the strength of character that a kid has to say, you know what, I could stay here in the WHL. I could get 90 points and score 40 goals, but I'm going to go challenge myself instead. And I'm going to learn how to play better defense. I'm going to play with better players. And I think that can only be good for his development. And then you think about him 2 years from now. Okay, he'll be on the other side of 3 years in college. That'll probably be the time for him to come up. And you have Jacob Trouba's contract, which goes to a 16-team no-trade list in 2 years. You have Nurse's contract, which is closer to done. But these guys will still be on the team and will be able to still impart some of their knowledge to guys like Verhoff and Lynn and Dickinson. And, you know, I still hold a small candle for Luca Cagnoni. I don't think he's going to really make much of an impact. But you have these veteran guys who are able to play, you know, NHL minutes, who are able to offer something. You know, I know there are people who are really low on Trouba, but Trouba, you know, he is the kind of veteran presence that you want to have in the locker room. He's got a ton of charisma. He's always been great with younger players. I think that's part of the calculus in signing him to a deal like that is, you know what, this guy could really help our next wave of defensemen become reliable NHL pros.
Sorry. Yeah, I think it's going to be really fun. I think it'll be interesting. Yeah, that obviously goes into it as well. It's not like the Sharks are trying to win the cup next year or maybe even the year after that. They're trying to build something here, and it'll be fun to see how these young players develop. And with the defense, it's so interesting because you've mentioned these guys. So they took Verhoff. Like I said, we'll jump around a little bit. They took Verhoff at 9th overall. Then the Sharks had another pick where they went and grabbed this other defenseman, Ryan Lynn, at 21st overall. And then also just a couple drafts ago, they drafted Sam Dickinson very high. I think that was a top 10 pick. So where do you land? Like, come 3-4 years from now, whatever it is, who's the quarterback on the top power play with Macklin Celebrini and Wilson? Because I think that's what we care. In a dynasty league, it's like, give me, like, that sounds like such a plum. Like, I want that guy. And it could end up being like a Darren Radish situation where they just sign someone out of free agency like the Leafs did and all the prospects, who cares? But I'd imagine the Sharks would prefer that just one of these guys ends up being their like stud top power play quarterback. But I feel like it feels like so totally up in the air. Is it more, I don't know, like a crystallized for you?
Let's not get too far ahead of ourselves here, Elon. I know it's exciting to talk about who is the power play quarterback, but I think the first thing you have to say about these 3 defensemen is that all 3 of them will play significant amounts of NHL games for the San Jose Sharks, which when you think about how difficult it is to draft players that play NHL games, I think San Jose can give themselves a pat on the back here, especially with the Ryan Lynn pick. I think that's a really high value pick where they got him. And so let's start there.
You're muted, yeah.
I think a lot of people coming out of the 2026 NHL entry draft are saying, okay, well, Ryan Lynn, he's going to be the power play 1 quarterback because, you know, he's small. He's got that, you know, he's got the shiftiness. He can walk the line. And I think that is that's a good bet to make. But that doesn't mean that Verhoff is not a great option for that role. That doesn't mean that Dickinson is not a great option for that role. I think the one thing I want to kind of make clear is that Ryan Lynn is an excellent all situations defender. He's not just kind of what he's been portrayed, I think, in the media and in some of our conversations in the Discord as being kind of an offensive guy. He's definitely an all situations guy. The question is whether his defending can translate to the NHL level. At his current level and in the WHL, and we'll see next year when he goes to Denver and plays in college. We'll see if his defending and his all-around game can translate, but he was really good in the WHL in all contexts. So I think it's fair to say he might be the front runner from an offensive standpoint, but I would really not be surprised, Elon, to see any two of those guys featuring on the San Jose top power play and then running a bit more of a balanced attack. They have a lot of great forwards that they can put into that power play too. And whoever is I think probably Dickinson ends up on power play too. I really do think it's possible that Keaton Verhoff could be on that top power play with Ryan Lynn, because one of the great things about Keaton Verhoff is his shot. His shot is elite. And I could see him being a flank option on the San Jose power play. You can just kind of picture it in your head. If you have a guy like Chernyshov at the front, you have Macklin on one end, you have Keaton Verhoff on the other, maybe Ryan Lynn is up in the back. And then you have a guy in the center. It could be, it could be a Will Smith. Maybe Will Smith is better served on the second power play. It could be a Stenberg in the center of the ice. There's a lot of different options and permutations, but one of those options I think you can consider is Keaton Verhoff on the flank, because his shot, he can get it off kind of from anywhere, and he likes to shoot. Like it's a big part of his game to shoot the puck. And so whether he ends up as the power play quarterback or not, I don't know, but I think they could both end up on the power play and get some good coverage from a fantasy standpoint.
Okay, so that's interesting. So both of them, some good upside. Maybe also they kind of like cap each other a little bit compared to maybe a guy who like is 100% for sure going to be like the guy on their team. Like Lane Hudson has turned out to be in Montreal. But yeah, the Sharks. Again, I guess we can't spend the whole episode talking about the Sharks, but obviously a very fun team for fantasy and in real life. But okay, let's go back to the draft. We're going to get to a bunch of other defensemen. Let's do the third overall pick first. Caleb Malhotra goes to the Vancouver Canucks shortly after they hired his dad, Manny Malhotra, to be the coach. Not to say that that's the only reason why they picked Caleb. Like, he's coming off a great season in the OHL, 84 points in 67 games. I do always have to remind myself when I see OHL or WHL or QMJHL stats that it's almost like if they're only point per game, it's like, who is this guy? What a schlub. Seems like there must be a lot of goals being scored in that league. But yeah, I know kind of your opinion already about this Caleb Malhotra pick. But yeah, it seems like you think maybe the Canucks left some upside on the table here.
Yeah, I mean, look, Caleb Malhotra will be an NHL player. I think let's get that out of the way. He's a good player. He's got a lot of bona fides on the two-way style of his game. He has some offense. He has some defense. But I think you need to look no further, Elon, than the draft video that the Vancouver Canucks released maybe a week after the draft. And if you're out there, just go look on X, look on Twitter, whatever you call it, but go and check it out, because there was they filmed the moment where Ivar Stenberg was picked and where they had to decide, is it going to be Caleb Malhotra or whoever else they were deciding between? And when they announced that San Jose had picked Ivar Stenberg, there was a palpable disappointment in the video. That's something that is out there on the internet. I don't know if you saw it, Elon.
No. So like the Canucks were disappointed that they thought Stenberg would fall to them?
I think that there was, remember as we go into the draft, even before they made, San Jose made that trade and it became kind of clear that they were going to pick Stenberg, I think there were a lot of people talking about, San Jose is definitely going to pick a defenseman. They're going to go and get Chase Reed. They're going to go and get Daxon Rudolph, whoever it might be, right? And so I think there was still some people who were thinking, maybe they could still go and get their defenseman, and maybe they get, someone like a Wyatt Cullen or something. It just depends on what San Jose decides is more important. And maybe they got some intel that Keaton Verhoff would fall as far as he did, and that's why they did that. But either way, back to Vancouver, like the owner, who I know is a polarizing figure himself, looked very disappointed. And there was a confirmation. It was like, okay, we're going to pick him. Okay, cool. And then they picked Caleb Malhotra. Malhotra is interesting, and I know I get a lot of flack, for people saying, or I say that there's a lot of players in these drafts, these past two drafts in particular, that are third line centers. And I do believe that Caleb Malhotra is a third line center. Like, I think that he is a very good player. I don't think he's quite elite at offense. I don't think he's quite elite at defense either. He's a good all-around player. Some of the comps are Nick Suzuki, which I think is kind of crazy. Bo Horvat is another one that I think he could, maybe, if I squint, he looks like Bo Horvat. But I think the one that comes up for me the most is Matty Beniers. And, this is someone, Elon, that you drafted in the Kakupdal. I know I've had a number of conversations with you that were like, I wish we could get more out of Matty Beniers. If we look back 6-7 years from now, I think you could probably see Caleb Malhotra having a very similar trajectory to Matty Beniers. And so maybe he's like a lower end second line center, but I think he's kind of like comfortably like middle six. That's kind of where I think he is. I don't think he's going to be the top line center. And I think, by the time he's ready to join the team, I fully expect Vancouver will have bottomed out and drafted maybe one or two more centers who will push Malhotra down to that spot. There are names next season. Keep these names in mind, Elon, for the draft next year. Carter Meyer and Alexis Joseph. Those are guys who I think have number one center upside. Like, I think those are guys who can really, do things on both sides of the puck, but are elite offensively. So you look at some of those guys. If Vancouver is able to grab one of them, you're not going to play Caleb Malhotra above one of those guys once they're like competing, as it were.
Right. They also drafted last year in 2025 Braden Coots, who's also a center. I assume you feel the same way about Coots, that he also is like going to get bumped down by whoever else they're able to pick after they bought him out for a couple of years.
Definitely. I think, last year I call last year the 3C draft, because every one of those centers that was drafted, I think of guys like Caleb Desnoyers, I think of Brady Martin, Jake O'Brien. Like, I think some things have to go right for some of those players for them to kind of break out of that kind of third line center mold. Brady Martin could certainly find some success on the wing in the top six. I think that's something that's a bit more realistic for someone like him. Caleb Desnoyers, I don't know if he has the offense, to be a 3C. And so Braden Coots was drafted, like 9-10 spots after some of those guys. And there's a reason why, and he did make his debut for Vancouver this year. He got into a couple of games. He did look a little bit behind the pace, and it didn't look like it was a good fit for him. He could come back this year, and maybe he starts this season as Vancouver's third line center. They don't have much there. But yeah, by the time some of these guys get into the lineup and Vancouver makes some decisions on guys like Elias Pettersson and Marco Rossi, and, maybe they trade them for more picks, or maybe they trade them for another kind of comparable center. I do think you're looking at a 3C Caleb Malhotra and a 4C Braden Coots.
Wow. Okay. Well, so for fantasy, maybe you have to be careful. For what it's worth, Malhotra went 5th overall in our dynasty draft. So we'll see if I guess that team is listening to you. New Hamilton Jackals are like, Ryan doesn't know what he's talking about. Forget about him. He doesn't know. But let's go on to a bunch of defensemen who got taken. So at number 4 was Daxon Rudolph, which I know was a bit of a surprise. That was the pick, of course, that Buffalo acquired when they traded away. Where am I blank? Oh, sorry. Bowen Byram, and everyone was like, "Oh, what a ripoff! Like, way to go, Buffalo! You got first for Bowen Byram. It's incredible." And then they picked Daxon Rudolph. I know some people are now being like, "Oh, that's who you picked." But I mean, we'll see. Daxon Rudolph coming off a big offensive season. The Rangers then took Albert Schmitz. Then Calgary took Carson Karlsson. Then Seattle took Chase Reed. So that is 4 defensemen in a row. And then Winnipeg took a forward who we'll get to, Vigo Bjork, and then another defenseman in Keaton Verhoff, who we've already talked about, went 9th. So a lot of defensemen to talk about here. I guess we might as well go in order. So Daxon Rudolph is someone who, I'll be honest, wasn't fully on my radar at this pick either. Not that I've been paying too close attention, but just from lists I'd seen, I didn't realize he was being expected to go that high. And but you look at the numbers: 78 points in 68 games as a defenseman. Sounds pretty good to me. Why do you think Buffalo made this pick, and do you think it was the right choice?
I have no idea, Elon, why Buffalo made this pick. And I don't think if you ask some of the people in that front office that they could answer that question either. Like you mentioned, they made that trade for Bowen Byram, and they got that pick from Chicago. I heard that the first time that Buffalo talked to Daxon Rudolph was the morning of the draft. And so, maybe this is the kind of situation where they never expected that they would be able to get this Chicago pick. And so why would we even bother talking to a player higher up like that? If our first pick is going to be 20 or whatever it was that they picked. And so maybe it's that situation. But this could also be something we talked about over drinks the other day, Elon. It's how these teams' scouting silos work, right? And these teams have huge scouting staffs spanning, hopefully across the entire world. Hopefully you have someone over in Europe, you have someone in Russia. Harder to do these days, I will say. Just given some of the challenges geopolitically, but you do hopefully have like a robust scouting team. And so when you see a pick like this and it's like, okay, Daxon Rudolph, he's one of the better options from the WHL. You wonder if the WHL scout, really had the ear of the management team and said, no, this is the guy, pounding the table. We want Daxon Rudolph. So that's kind of the reservation there, I think. I'm going to go into a little bit of physics here, Elon. We had this conversation as well. I want to explain a little bit of kinetic force here. And there's going to be certainly people in our Discord community who will be better at explaining this than me. But basically, kinetic energy is going to be a half of mass times velocity squared, right? So what that tells us, the velocity is the most important thing because that's the player's skating speed, and it is the most critical factor because that's the thing that's going to be squared. So a heavier player will carry more energy towards a player to separate a player from the puck, for instance, if they're going at the same speed. But a lighter player, if they are going at a faster speed, they're going to kind of double effectively the force. That's kind of how this works here. And why does this relate to Daxon Rudolph? Well, I would argue that the kinetic energy that Daxon Rudolph exerts as a defenseman is near zero because he doesn't move his feet. Like he doesn't, when he's defending, and I think there's a lot of ways you can spin this, but there's a lot of NHL people who will say, oh, he just lets the game come to him. But if you're letting the game come to you and then letting the game get past you to your net, that is not a good thing for a defenseman in the NHL, right? And so Daxon Rudolph is a player. When I watched him this season, anytime he's got people barreling down towards him, he doesn't make an effort with his body to move into the path of these players or to disrupt them or close the gap in any way. I see his stick go out and he's rangy for sure. He could reach, with his stick, but he doesn't exert any force in that direction. And so I can tell you with absolute certainty that there will be an NHL coach. Maybe it's not Lindy Ruff at this point. Maybe it's someone else, but there will be an NHL coach who will be like, we want you to move your feet more. We want you to be more engaged and close the gap with your feet. And that's the thing that worries me about Daxon Rudolph is I'm not sure that that's his style. And so that dramatically decreases his ceiling. If you want someone on the ice who can give you like 78 points in 68 games or 27 points in 19 playoff, there's no way Daxon Rudolph will get 27 points in 19 NHL playoff games. Playing the way that he did this season is just impossible. There's no way. And so just from my perspective, as someone who watched Rudolph a lot this year, I know that Buffalo will probably try and develop that instinct in him, but if they don't, he's going to get burned in the NHL. And in order for players like Rudolph to get chances to score points, they need trust from the coaching staff. And the reality in Buffalo is there's so many great options ahead of him. You have Rasmus Dahlin, who's not going anywhere unless he signs a contract elsewhere. You've got Owen Power, who's going to be around for a long time. You've got Mattias Samuelsson, who's going to be around for a long time. Those are all guys that can close gaps, and Daxon Rudolph can't. So, and that's why I think in our NHL or in our, I should say, dynasty drafts, the ones that I've been a part of, he's fallen down below guys like Schmitz, Verhoff, Karlsson, who are more active defensively. Karlsson in particular is a guy who closes gaps with his feet, and it's a big hallmark of his game, and that's translatable to the NHL level. Daxon Rudolph, I'm not sure if he's translatable. He'll have to do some work.
I mean, the way you're describing him reminds me of when I was trying to play Chell with some of the patrons, and then I have no idea what I'm doing. And then if I was the only person between the guy coming forward and then and I'm the defense controlling the defenseman, I would just press that one button where you can try to do a poke check and hope that I'll knock the puck out of the way. And I'd usually end up getting a penalty, and the other team would get a penalty shot, and everyone would yell at me, and then I stopped playing Chell. But that's why I am not an NHL defenseman here. But I'll just mention Daxon Rudolph, like I said, he fell all the way to 13th overall pick in our Cupdale draft. I don't know if that's because of his lack of momentum going towards defenders, or if it was more just like, I don't want to draft a defenseman on Buffalo because we've seen what happened with like Owen Power and Bowen Byram, who had no opportunities to really produce. But yeah, he's definitely not someone currently being highly regarded for Dynasty.
And it could very well be something like that, Elon. One of the comps that people talk about for Rudolph is Shea Theodore, who famously was not drafted by the Vegas Golden Knights. He was drafted by Anaheim, and he was blocked in Anaheim and eventually got moved out of Anaheim. So certainly we could see a situation here where Rudolph gets traded. Wouldn't be surprised. They traded Bowen Byram. Nothing would surprise me at this point if they decided to trade Daxon Rudolph as well. Someone like Shea Theodore went in the late first round, I think somewhere around 26, 27. That's kind of where I had Daxon Rudolph this season. Like I thought he was going to be an end of the first round guy just because of his, lack of engagement in the play and pace. It was a similar kind of criticism that was levied at a guy like Shea Theodore. And obviously Theodore has overcome some of that and become a very productive NHLer and certainly landed on the top power play in Vegas. And I think that's in no small part to, having a guy like Alex Pietrangelo on his team to learn from. And so maybe Dax Rudolph will get some time playing with Buffalo. Maybe he can learn from Rasmus Dahlin, learn some of the things that makes him so successful. I don't want to make it out like I hate Dax Rudolph. I don't. I think he's a good offensive hockey player, but he's missing some quality on the defensive end, and it's not something that's easy to develop in this kind of player archetype.
All right, well, let's take a break, and then we're going to go to my new favorite player from this draft because I have him in 2 dynasty leagues. We'll be back in a sec. So, 5th overall, the New York Rangers take a guy. Oh, wait, let me just do this again. Okay, 5th overall, the New York Rangers are up. They take Albert Schmitz. I understand that people are thinking, oh, he's like good in real life. He's not going to be good for fantasy. In my first draft that I did this summer, not the Keeping Karlsson Dynasty League, but the other one, the pick, I didn't have a first round pick. And then we got to like 7th, 8th. Schmitz still wasn't taken. Got to 9th overall. I was like, telling my co-manager, John, by the way, cool guy, John Reed. I feel like we need a defenseman here. This seems like good value. And anyways, we ended up talking to a team that needed a goalie. We traded UPL for the pick, took Albert Schmitz. Then we do the Keeping Karlsson Dynasty League, and the picks were coming past 9, 10, 11. Finally, it was 12th overall. Schmitz still hadn't been taken, and that's when we reached out and traded a package of guys, McGroarty, Nesbitt, and a second, and got the 12th overall pick, who we also used for the IRL 5th overall pick. So just on paper, it seems like pretty good to get the 5th overall pick. But of course, sometimes a player is just like really good defensively and good for real life. Like I've seen some comps of like a Jacob Slavin. I don't even know if I've seen that. Actually, maybe that was for another player I've seen. But, I imagine like a Jacob Slavin, who's like considered one of the best defensemen in the league. And yet he's in free agency, I think, in one of my dynasty leagues, just because like he doesn't do anything for you in fantasy. Is there a chance... And you better say yes. Is there a chance that Schmitz is more than just a guy who will play some minutes, maybe get some hits and blocks? Is there any offense here for Albert Schmitz over on the Rangers?
Yes, there is eventually. And that's where I'll start with this guy. Albert Schmitz, yes, this is our guy, Elon. We gave up a not inconsiderable package for him. And the first thing I'd like to say about Schmitz is I'd be a little surprised to see him outside of the NHL for this entire season. He has proven in so many different contexts these past seasons that he can play with men, and he has the skill set to do so. I think he played on 5 different teams this year. I'll count them: Jukurit in the Liga, and then he played in the DEL, the German league for Munich. He played for the Latvian World Junior team, the Latvian Olympic team, and the Latvian World Championship team. So that's 5 teams. And he looked completely like he belonged in every one of those league contexts, especially in the Olympics, playing against some great NHL players. And so I would be shocked to not see Schmitz play with the New York Rangers at some point this season, even if he's just kind of a 5-6 guy. You look at the bottom of that, New York did a huge, retool of their defense this year. They kept Fox, they kept Gavrikov, but then their whole second pairing has shifted. It's Sean Durzi and Marcus Pettersson, now acquired from Vancouver for that, 2034 first round pick, whatever it was.
Yeah, I think it's
just like some 12-year-old is going to be drafted by Vancouver using that New York Rangers pick. And so you look at the bottom and you've got guys like Matthew Robertson, Braden Schneider, you've got Scott Morrow and Albert Schmitz. I could see that third pairing working in a number of different ways. And Schmitz is certainly, I think, probably the highest quality player of those 4 guys right now. So I think we can expect for right now something akin to 15 to 17 minutes a night with some bash coverage and maybe some points here or there. But I think he's definitely kind of a slow burn to offensive relevance. One of the things I do also want to say about Schmitz is he played on a lot of really bad hockey teams this year. Those 5 teams, they weren't, world beaters, we'll say. Jukurit was so bad that he eventually asked to be moved to the DEL team. They weren't much better. And what that means is that Schmitz is spending a lot of time playing defense. And there's an interview out there, I think it was Game Tape with Tony Ferrari that he did, scout Tony Ferrari, whose opinions I think are well worth the read if you get the chance. He was talking with Schmitz, and Schmitz says, well, I play on a lot of bad teams, and so I've had a lot of practice with defense. And so a lot of people will say, oh, he's just a defensive defenseman. You look at some of the comps, Ryan McDonough, Eric Johnson, Not exactly world-beating offensive players, but then there's one that jumps out to me, which I think is pretty good for Schmitz, and that's Mike Matheson, who, under the right circumstances was a power play quarterback and was someone who was really delivering a lot from the offensive point of view until he got supplanted by a Lane Hudson. I do think that there's more room to grow for Schmitz on the offensive side. I just think he didn't get the chance to really showcase it as much playing on the teams that he did this year. New York was going to be better this year. I personally think that they're kind of a wild card team. So I think there's room for him to kind of contribute from the back end offensively, and especially if he gets to play in situations with players like Pavel Dorofeev, Mika Zibanejad, Alexi Lafreniere. Like there's a lot of quality, I would say, offensively. And so I don't think necessarily he'll be a power play quarterback right away or something. But if you just look at the timing, Elon, Adam Fox has 3 years left, I think. There's a 3-year entry-level contract facing Schmitz right now. I think you could easily see. Oh, the other thing too, Dursey has 2 years left. So maybe there's a situation in the best case scenario for Schmitz where he starts to take a little bit of Dursey's role next season as they kind of prepare either to ship Dursey out to another team, or if they try and re-sign him and he becomes a less priority part of their team as he gets a bit older. And then you can see, if they decide to move on from Adam Fox, which certainly it doesn't seem like Chris Drury is the biggest fan of Adam Fox, just given how things have gone from the past couple of years. I think you could see a world where Schmitz gets a little bit more offensive play at 5-on-5, and then maybe, power play 2, and who knows, injuries happen. Maybe he gets the opportunity on power play 1.
Yes. Okay. So you're saying don't expect too much right away, except we are getting a potential NHL defenseman right away, which is not nothing. And if he can do some hits and blocks, that could be valuable. And then we just got to pray, as someone who has him in 2 leagues, that he can show some offense at some point.
Yes, he has all the tools, Elon, to be a very important blue liner for the New York Rangers. And certainly his personality is definitely one that will fit in that market. Rangers fans will love him. He's just got a ton of charisma. And so just keep an eye on Albert Schmitz. I think that there's a lot more, offensive runway for this player.
Yeah, it's always so interesting. Like you try to, if you're not like a scout, watching the tape of these games, how do you compare like a Daxon Rudolph with over point per game in the AHL? Then you look at Schmitz's numbers, you like 13 points in 38 games in Liga. And then you're saying, first of all, it was like a bad team, but also I'd imagine the competition was just harder playing against, older players, playing against like, pro hockey players versus like juniors. It's very hard to like, tease out who's actually the better offensive player there.
Yeah, you just have to imagine what would Albert Schmitz look like playing in the WHL, and I think he would be an absolute monster. Like you're looking at a guy who could contribute, the kind of season you may be expected from Keaton Verhoff. But it's the same decision that Verhoff made, right? Verhoff, like I'm sure that there's someone in Schmitz's life, an advisor or an agent or whatever you want to call them, that said, "Hey, do you want to go play in Canada for a bit? Maybe you could go and play, for whatever." CHL team drafted his rights, whoever that might be. He made a decision, to stay and play in Europe and play against Men and Ukarit and then in the German league. And, this Latvian international campaign for him, I'm sure was a huge decision-making factor for him in choosing to stay over there and play with Men. But you just have to imagine, what would Albert Schmitz look like playing in the WHL? And I just kind of get giddy thinking about it because I think he'd be incredible.
Well, I'd also imagine what you're thinking of Daxon Rudolph playing in the leagues that Schmitz played in. I'd imagine you're thinking, I'm seeing the look on your face. Okay, well, we still got some more defensemen here who got taken super high. So the Calgary Flames take Karlsson. This is a team that already has Zane Parekh. So right away, it's kind of like with the Sharks. Right away thinking, like, I remember just a year ago, people were telling me Zane Parekh is going to be like the big, like next huge top power play, like big offensive defenseman here. Calgary takes Karlsson. Should people who have Parekh in a dynasty league be like, competition, or is it just like kind of two different roles that, kind of like Dickinson versus a Verhoff where, they're not necessarily being picked to compete for the same role?
I mean, it's hard to say. Zane Parekh didn't exactly have the best of all seasons to start his NHL career. And that's not knocking the player too much. I mean, we all knew what Zane Parekh was coming into the NHL. He was a guy who gave up as much as he got. And for as exciting as some of his offensive plays are, and look no further than that World Junior tournament where he was a standout, excellent player. He also gave up a lot in that context, and he gave up a lot in Calgary, and it saw him drop to the third pairing, and he was splitting time with one of the Brustevich brothers. I think it was Henry. I'm not sure which one of them is the Calgary guy, but one of them, Henry or Hunter Brustevich, was splitting time with him on the third pairing. And yes, it seems to me like Zane Parekh won that battle, but I'm not sure that he could win the battle against Carson Karels, whose strength is in his two-way game. He's excellent on both sides of the puck. And Karels doesn't have the offensive upside of Zane Parekh, but I could definitely see him taking that power play one role if Calgary sees him as a 1D in all situations and want to reward him for his excellent work at 5-on-5 and on the penalty kill with power play time. He is, from my perspective, the anti-Rudolph, and I mentioned that earlier, in that he has powerful, fluid skating, allows him to close gaps well, using his feet to defend, and plays with a physicality that you hope for, too, from a guy his size at 18 years old. He's going to go play at Nodak this season, so we'll see him on a blue line with Keaton Verhoff. And, you know, I could see him kind of being one and done in college. I don't imagine Carson Karels needs that much time in college. He seems pretty close to ready now. And frankly, as a Western Canadian boy who grew up on the farm, I could see him wanting to get back to Canada as soon as possible. Someone like Charlie McAvoy seems like a really great comp for Carson Karels. And Charlie McAvoy ends up on the top power play in Boston pretty quick into his career. So, you know, if Carson Karels, if he doesn't hit that offensive ceiling, maybe he's more of like a Ryan McDonough type. But either way, this is a player who's going to be playing in this league for 12, 13, 14 years. And in those years, I think there's some years that he might get that opportunity over Zane Parekh.
Yeah, and I mean, there is another name there, right? Simon Nemec, who they traded for, now just signed to a long-term contract. So definitely some competition over in Calgary. It'll be fun to see. I feel like for next season, Simon Nemec seems to me like a good bet to get some top power play time if Zane Parekh can't hold a roster spot. But long term, we'll see. But Carol sounds like you're pretty into. Then we get to finally Chase Reed, who I feel like, again, when you're talking about going into the draft, some people were thinking maybe the Sharks would take him at number 2. He falls all the way to 7th overall to Seattle, who's not known for drafting defensemen. Is this a good landing spot? I know, correct me if I'm wrong, Chase Reed is like our top like offensive defenseman of the draft, like going into it, the guy who people were expecting to be the guy with the highest offensive upside. I get a little concerned right away when I hear Seattle, like, well, what kind of upside really is there in Seattle? Is he just another Vince Dunn or Brandon Montour, which is not terrible but not amazing?
Yeah, I mean, Chase Reed's a great hockey player. He rose a little quick in the rankings for me. If you look at rankings from this time last year, Elon, Chase Reed, I think, is nowhere near being the first defenseman taken. He was cut actually from his U.S. junior team and then found his way into the CHL and ended up being, you know, one of the best defensemen in the CHL. And that always gives you a little bit of pause because it makes you wonder, did he just get hot for a season? Is this who he actually is? If this is who Chase Reed is, then the sky is the limit for him. And we'll definitely see more when he goes to college next season. I think the NCAA is going to be the great leveler, Elon, for a lot of these players who are looking to have that kind of challenge before they get into the pro ranks over here in North America. I think that, you know, I saw an analysis. I can't really get into it too much because it's been a while since I read it. But there is an analysis out there that says that the NCAA might be a higher quality league than the AHL. And just based on the types of players that are going there and the schedule that they get to have, I mean, it's very similar to the AHL in that they're playing weekends and, you know, there's a lot of training time. So I think you could see a lot of players moving towards the NCAA and trying to see, okay, is this a level I can play at? And so we'll see what happens with Chase Reed. But the comp that's out there for Chase Reed, and this is if everything goes right, people, this is if his development has no flaws whatsoever and he gets to play, you know, when he gets to the NHL, maybe he plays with the likes of Berkeley Catton, you know, maybe Jared McCann is still kicking around, you know, these are, you know, Jake O'Brien, like high-end offensive players. Zach Werenski is the name that kind of comes up a lot for Chase Reed. That is one I could see too, but everything needs to go well for him. You know, when it comes to blockers like Vince Dunn and Brandon Montour, I don't see the likes of those players giving him too much trouble 2 years down the road from now. And I expect that he will jump right into an important role with Seattle at all situations. And important to note, Elon, this is the first time the Seattle Kraken have spent this kind of draft capital on a defenseman. And so you know that they are kind of incentivized, especially with the new kind of leadership regime, you know, with Ron Francis kind of not around anymore. I think that this new leadership regime is going to really want to put a stamp on this guy and say, this is our guy. We drafted this guy, the highest drafted defenseman in Seattle Kraken history, and he's going to be a cornerstone player for us moving forward. He's going to change us from this team of kind of middle six, you know, all the way down to a team where we can have like a really high-end offensive piece.
Yeah, and honestly, like I brought up Dunn and Montour, but Dunn has 1 year left on his contract, and we'll see if he resigns or if he goes to UFA after next season. Brandon Montour has 5 years left, but he's 32 years old, so you can't imagine the plan is just to run Montour forever. And then there's really, like you said, since they haven't drafted any defensemen, like who is the next highest like competitor to Chase Reed for offensive minutes? Like Riker Evans, I guess. I don't even know if I can't even think of another name. So yeah, it seems like a great opportunity for him, and yeah, Seattle could have taken this next guy we're going to talk about, Vigo Bjork, who I know people really like. So obviously, yeah, I think this seems like a really great situation. At first blush, like, oh, Seattle, okay, that's not going to work out well. Kind of how you think of whenever the Rangers draft someone, it's like, oh, forget about them. They're not going to develop. And I know, by the way, for Albert Schmitz, the counterpoint to that is people are saying, well, he's already developed. He's like been playing against men, so you don't have to worry about the Rangers messing up his development too much. But yeah, Chase Reed seems like it could actually be a really good spot without a lot of competition, unlike some of these other people we've talked about, like Carroll's or like Daxon Rudolph, of course. Okay. So Vigo Bjork, now we go to a forward, 8th overall to the Winnipeg Jets. The Winnipeg Jets, I think ever since Brian and I started doing this podcast, we've been talking about the Winnipeg Jets trying to figure out who's going to be the 2C. Like there was Mark Scheifele, and then I think it was Brian Little for a while when we started the podcast, and he was pretty good, but then he kept on getting injured. And then all of a sudden it was just like every season it seemed like we were talking about a trade of like they tried, I think Kevin Hayes. Did they get JT Miller? Paul Stastny. Oh yeah, Brian loved Paul Stastny. Was JT Miller there for like half a season at one point?
No, I don't think he was. No, Paul Stastny's the one that jumps out to me. And they always seem to be spending assets to get that second line center position.
Yeah. So, well, maybe now they finally have drafted him. And who knows, maybe even a first line center one day because Mark Scheifele's not going to be around forever. Vigo Bjork. I know that the general vibe I see, and again, I'm like just like on Twitter a lot, seeing the beat writers. Might just be that Winnipeg has some very excited fans and beat writers, or it might just be that Vigo Bjork is that good. So what do you think? Is this really finally the answer to the Winnipeg Jets getting a very high-end center for their top 6?
Vigo Bjork is that good, Elon. He was Sweden's #1 center at the World Championships and at the World Junior Championships, despite being the youngest player on both rosters. And he played as the #1 center with Djurgårdens in the SHL as well. So this is a guy who has proven that he can play against men and he can succeed and be a player who's trusted to play a very important role for some of these teams. And so the question is, okay, can he jump right away to the NHL? And for those who don't know, he has signed his entry-level contract. Djurgårdens actually released him from his contract early, which clears him to go to the Jets or AHL Manitoba. And so I think the thing you have to hope for here is that he doesn't end up in Manitoba, for the Manitoba Moose, I should say. He will end up in Manitoba either way, but I hope he doesn't end up playing for the Manitoba Moose because that team is an absolute travesty for developing NHL talent, and it's kind of where prospects go to die. Part of this is certainly Winnipeg's drafting and evaluation mistakes over the past couple of years, but on a team with first-round talent like Brad Lambert, Nikita Chibrikov, Colby Barlow, and Braden Yeager, those players should be your top players if you're a development organization, and not the likes of Philip Di Giuseppe and Mason Shaw, who are AHL veterans at this point. And Manitoba was not proven, this was not good decision-making for them because they didn't have a great season either. So it appears to me that with all this talk of Vigo Bjork being elevated to this 2C position, and you have guys like Brad Lambert and Isaac Rosane and, maybe Braden Yeager makes the team this year, it looks like Winnipeg is entering a new era in terms of how they handle their prospects. And I think this has been something that's been coming for a long time. And the reality is when you're Winnipeg and you're the least desirable market in the NHL, you need to offer something to players to get them to stick around. And I think that something is opportunity. So yes, the 2C slot is up for grabs. And so I love Vigo, and I think that's eventually his role in the NHL. You mentioned Brian Little. I think he could be Brian Little for sure. I think it may be a mistake to just shove him in there too soon. I'd prefer if they let someone like Adam Lowry or even Brad Lambert or Braden Yeager go there first and have Vigo win the spot from that player. I think it just makes more sense to, instead of just dropping a player into the spot and saying, here you go, kid, good luck. I think you have to have the player earn it, but I think he will. And I definitely don't hate the idea of a Bjork Perfetti line that has one of like Rosane or Brad Lambert on the wing when things get settled. I think each guy playing in that context with Bjork would have a 60-point potential, just because I think Bjork is one of those transformative kind of players in the vein of like a Logan Stankoven, someone like Marco Rossi, just elevates all the players around him. And so, while I do expect Bjork will go through the usual trouble of translating to North American Pro, as many small players do, I think he does end the season as the 2C for Winnipeg, playing with some of those young players. And I think that while I don't think Winnipeg will have a high ceiling as a team, I think that will be something that the fans can really, take to heart as like, we've got our good young, a good piece of our young core settled away here.
Interesting. So yeah, maybe like a 2020, what would it be? 2028 Calder candidate for Vigo Bjork. Okay, so let's not forget about him. Okay, so 9th overall, Keaton Verhoff. We've talked about him. Then we get Wyatt Cullen, whose name I've been seeing a lot over the last couple of days. I guess they've been having some tournament to prepare for the World Junior Championships, and Wyatt Cullen's been popping off a little bit. He goes to the Nashville Predators, a team with maybe an underrated prospect pool. There's a few names there that I know people have been talking about and getting excited about. What do you think about Wyatt Cullen and his top 10 pick here?
Yeah, there's a lot of variance and projection here for Wyatt Cullen. Here's a list of names, Elon, that come up when you think about Wyatt Cullen. You look at a bunch of different comps. Chris Peters has perhaps the most aggressive comp, I'll say, by saying that he's a Tim Stützle. I don't think that that's true. I don't think that that's where he's going to end up. I think you look at elite prospects. They had guys like Troy Terry and Martin Necas. I could see Troy Terry. I could see maybe him being even a bit better than Troy Terry. And then Pronman, I think, actually has the best comp for Cullen, and that is Nick Schmaltz, a guy who's solid on both sides of the puck, but is really kind of an offensive juggernaut. He will no matter kind of what type of player he ends up being. There's a ton of offensive upside, and he will be an excellent college player next year. He has good compete. He wins puck battles and creates chances, and so I think he is definitely a top 6 player for sure when he gets to the NHL, but I wouldn't be surprised to see him take a year or two in college before, moving to pro in the AHL and having a dominant season there before making it to the NHL. And like you mentioned, Nashville is going to have a lot of exciting offensive talent arriving all around the same time. And I could see a major competition for the top 6 with Cullen, Brady Martin, Teddy Stiga, Yegor Surin, Riker Lee. Philip Forsberg will still be around then and still be a serviceable top 6 player. Maverick Bourque, who they just acquired from Dallas. And then you have Matthew Wood there too, who, he doesn't have great boots, but he's got a great shot. And so I can see him certainly being a reasonable option for a top 6 winger. So if it were my team, I think it'd probably be a top line of Maverick Bourque with Yegor Surin and Philip Forsberg, and then a second line of Bourque with Lee and Martin on the wings.
Oh, wow.
Which would lock.
You're leaving out someone.
Yeah, well, it would lock Cullen out, right? But
I also like Luke Evangelista. Sorry for interrupting. I thought he
no, it's okay. Evangelista will actually come up as a comp for one of the players much farther down the list later, which should tell you kind of what I think about him. He'll be kind of a third line, kind of guy, I think, when all of these guys show up.
Gotcha.
Right. But like I said earlier, Martin can play third line center. So maybe that's the swap that gets Cullen into the top 6. But no matter how you slice it, I think there's a lot to be excited about in Nashville.
So we've got Brady Martin on our Keeping Karlsson dynasty team, one of our few high-end prospects as the reigning champion. Not going to brag too much, but if we got an offer right now of Wyatt Cullen for Brady Martin, are we taking that, or is it a quick reject?
I just think, I think Brady Martin has a lot of value for people who maybe aren't paying attention, is possibly the most diplomatic way I can say that. Brady Martin, I think, got a really good media push with the whole farm boy thing. And, playing as a top offensive player for Team Canada in the World Juniors, I think that has some cachet. Wyatt Cullen's a bit more of an unknown name. And so I just think that there's more value in a Brady Martin right now from an asset standpoint. When it comes to what kind of roles these guys will play, I think it'll be pretty similar eventually. I think you'll see pretty similar kind of 60 to 70 point output for both of them. And then at their peaks, maybe they're like 80-point guys, point per game. But yeah, I think, in terms of right now, I think I'd probably still keep Brady Martin just because I think someone will give us something better than Wyatt Cullen.
Oh, I see. So as a trade chip down the road, hey? Okay.
Yeah.
Our doors are open, or whatever our phones are on.
And we're valuing him as a number 1 center, just so you know.
I mean, you did just say like 60, 70. But I'll take 60, 70 points if he hits a lot also. That's pretty good for Brady Martin.
Yeah.
Right? Okay, so we've got, there are 84 games in the season coming up, so maybe 60 points isn't going to be worth as much as it used to be, the inflation there. 11th overall, St. Louis Blues take Tynan Lawrence. I'm just gonna keep going down the list here. I guess at some point we'll get to like, okay, we can stop talking about these players are starting to get boring. But I don't think Tynan Lawrence is a boring name. He's been going pretty high. I haven't been giving actually the results so much of our draft we just did as we've been going. Just to give a quick recap here of the guys we've talked about. So this was the Cuptel draft. First overall, McKenna, then Stenberg, then Chase Reed came third. The same team, Don't Stop Believing, took Chase Reed and Vigo Bjork at third and fourth. Then Caleb Malhotra fifth, Carson Carroll sixth, Wyatt Cullen 7, Verhoff 8, and then next up, Tynan Lawrence, who went 11th overall in real life, but got bumped up here by Dead Ringers. Do you think that was a smart pick? I don't want to do too much like calling out or giving kudos to teams outside of ours, but Tynan Lawrence, is he maybe the opposite, like IRL, maybe not as valuable, but for fantasy? I think of like last year, who was the guy that's there's been okay. I'll remember when you're talking next. Like some players who people are like, I don't know if the guy that St. Louis drafted last year, really high up, that people were really into, with a French name.
Yeah, we'll find it. By
Okay,
the time I finish talking, you'll have
Tynan Lawrence. Yeah, but I'm talking like players who like maybe like I don't know how good they're going to be in terms of value for their team in a playoff push one day down the road.
Oh, Justin Carbonneau. Yeah, that's the guy. Yeah.
So
I need to look it up.
There you go. Brilliant. So Justin Carbonneau went last year to St. Louis. This year they have Tynan Lawrence. I guess I asked you to compare the two here, but what do you think of Lawrence first?
Yeah, I like Tynan Lawrence. And like you mentioned, it will go down the list and they'll get less interesting, but this guy is still pretty interesting. The interesting story with Tynan Lawrence, let me tell the story of his season. He started with Muskegon in the USHL. He had a great season for them last year. He was on his way to having another great season with them this year, but he made a decision, one that I will never begrudge any player for going forward, to play against better competition. And sure, Tynan Lawrence, again, could have stayed in the U.S. Junior League, which is not great, especially now with a lot of these USHL players being allowed to go play in the CHL because they won't ruin their college eligibility. There were a lot of players that left the USHL. Tynan Lawrence went to college, went to BU, and he didn't have a great season. He had an injury. He had 7 points in 18 games at a very bad Boston University team this year. And so I think, there was a rumor going around that at the Combine that there were NHL teams that were actually chastising Tynan Lawrence for making that decision. And I'm like, what are you guys talking about? Like, this guy decides he wants to go play at a higher level of competition. That's something that you should celebrate as a team. So what would another year dunking on noobs in the USHL really have proven for Lawrence? I like that he challenged himself. One of the projections that comes up, the high end, is Dylan Holloway, who plays with St. Louis now. Kind of the center version of Holloway. Another one that comes up is Ryan McLeod. I kind of like that Ryan McLeod projection for Lawrence. A guy who can hit 60 points and be very kind of relied upon in the defensive zone. Braden Shen also seems like a decent comp for him as well. But I expect either way that Tynan Lawrence is going to have to take some time developing here. He'll develop with Boston. He'll have a much better, I'm putting my money on the table right now. He's going to have a much better season this year with Boston University than he did last season. He's going to be ready for it this time. You won't ultimately find him lacking on either side of the puck, and he should be a mainstay as a middle six center for St. Louis. I'm not expecting necessarily point per game from him, but he will be a relied upon player in that system.
Yeah, well, sometimes that's a good guy to take in a dynasty league, even just before the trade chip. If you're saying that he is going to have a good season next year in college, imagine then what you'd be able to get for him after a big season. But then also maybe he'll end up being a big player for the St. Louis Blues. Do you like, Laura, if you're now, I got to ask, comparing to Carbonneau there, Justin Carbonneau, who would you rather have in a dynasty league if you could have either, your pick of a St. Louis Blues prospect?
Yeah, I think it's one of those things where it's close and you need to look at your league settings. I'm still kind of high on Carbonneau. I'd like to see him challenge himself at a higher level in the QMJHL, and I think we're going to see that soon with him. And so, whether it's jumping to the NHL or whatever it might be, I'm not exactly up on my Justin Carbonneau right now, but I think he has some offensive potential, but I think Tynan Lawrence has more certainty. And so I think you can expect something close to 55 to 60 points out of Tynan Lawrence. I think Carbonneau, it's going to really depend on how his next couple of years of development goes and how much he can add to his game, how many tools he can add to make himself a more well-rounded player so he's not just kind of a scratch and score kind of player.
I see. Yeah. When you talk also about guys who like sort of have their first year in college and it's not too impressive, but then you expect them to come in like kind of ready to go the second year. I think of like Dean Letourneau, who was a prospect
Yes.
for Boston, who was like I think terrible. Like consider
Uh-huh.
like in his first season, I think 1 point or something, and then like last season he really went off. Oh yeah, it was 3 points in 36 games. I have it here for Letourneau in 24-25, and then 39 points in 36 games on the same team just 1 year later as a 19-year-old. So I guess we'll see if that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Dean Letourneau is a great example of that. And he was coming from St. Andrews College, a high school program where he was the best player and the biggest player. And he went into college, and anyone could have told you that that would have been a huge leap for him. And it was, right? But then, he comes back this year and he's probably their most important player. So yeah, of course, like this could happen. And you're going to see with Keaton Verhoff too next year. Keaton Verhoff is going to be, I think, probably one of the most important defensemen on that team next season. And it's because he had this kind of formative experience this year.
Right. So next up, we get the New Jersey Devils, who take a center in Alexander Command, or maybe Command. You can tell me the correct pronunciation there, but my sense right away, of course, is just like, oh, it's New Jersey, and they took a center. 3C. Come on, obviously, what it's not gonna bump Heisha or Jack Hughes, right? But you look at the numbers. Again, this is a guy who played on a ton of different teams last year, just like how you talked about Albert Schmitz. So some of these numbers look really good. Like when he was on the U20 national team, I'm seeing here 44 points in 30 games. Also, really good World Junior Championships. But also in the SHL, I guess 6 games with no points. But anyways, these are very small sample sizes here. Alexander Command, is he any more than a 3C if, let's say he got traded to another team where there was an opening?
It's not a derogatory thing being a 3C. It's hard to get that role in the NHL. And yes, Command figures to slot in as a third line center for the Devils eventually. But he's a player that contributes to winning hockey. There's no doubt about it. And he's a guy who has a lot of personality. He's a guy who drags his team into the fight. He's definitely a guy you want on your team if you're trying to win. And so I could see him playing with New Jersey sooner rather than later. Probably not next year, although stranger things have happened. It reminds me a lot of a guy like Ben Kindle. I think Command has maybe a bit more on the defensive side than Ben Kindle does, but I think, Command can play against professional hockey players and look good. The upside comp for Command, which I don't think he hits just because I think there's too many options ahead of him, is Joel Eriksson Ek. I don't think he quite has that kind of upside. Another one that kind of resonates with me is Braden Shen. This is another, player, middle six center, tough matchups. Christian Dvorak was Corey Pronman's comp. I think you're looking kind of around there for that kind of a player. And I think Dvorak is a good example of a guy who can play up the lineup. Wenberg is another guy, can play up the lineup, can contribute to winning hockey. He's a guy you want on your team. Just the offensive upside is maybe nothing to write home about. He's well-rounded enough to play in all situations, but nothing is particularly elite for him. Another guy who is actually on the New Jersey Devils right now, Dawson Mercer. That's a guy who I think, he and Command have a lot. They rhyme. There's a lot of similarities in their game, but I do think Command probably settles in that 3C role and will be there probably for a long time.
Yeah, and the thing with a Dawson Mercer is he'd be very frustrating to have in a dynasty league because he's making, well, I guess now he's making $4 million for one more season, Dawson Mercer. Who knows what kind of contract he gets? I'd imagine New Jersey considers him a pretty valuable piece for them, even though he doesn't get a lot of offense, which means he's going to be kind of tricky in a cap league to decide whether to hold on to or to try to trade him before he's making like $8 million a year, but only giving you 30 points a season. And so it sounds like if you're saying that he rhymes with Dawson Mercer, Alexander Command, that would concern me a little bit. And it did concern our league. Command fell all the way to 24th overall, where finally the passing proletariats took a shot on Command, even though in real life he got taken, like I said, 12th overall.
And I'm going to say that's good value for Alexander Command.
Sure.
To get him at 24, that is really good dynasty value. And maybe they would have picked him sooner, Elon, if they didn't trade their pick to us.
That's true. Well,
they traded the Schmitz pick. They got Nesbitt and Rutger McGroarty, two guys who can help them probably sooner than whatever pick they were going to make there, which is Alexander Command, and they still got their guy, at 24 or whatever it was. So I think that's great value.
Oh, well, I guess they owe us maybe a gift basket or something for giving them that opportunity to get their guy and get some prospects along the way. Sure. Okay, so we keep going down. A guy who I've seen also on Twitter, but for negative reasons, unlike Wyatt Cullen, Malte Gustafsson goes to the Islanders. I saw he had a bad takeaway or giveaway in a game like yesterday. But again, these are like tryouts for the World Junior Championship, so I don't think you want to put too much weight into it. But the Islanders, again, like right away. And you tell me, like as a prospect guy, but also like a fantasy player, should I not be reading into the team too much? Like maybe, these are 18-year-olds. Like so much can change in their situation. Like they can get traded or the team could just have an overhaul. But like when I see a guy drafted the Islanders, I'm like, well, Matthew Schaefer is their guy forever. It's kind of like when you go to Buffalo. It's like Dahlin's their guy forever. But Schaefer's their guy even longer than Dahlin in Buffalo. Schaefer's only going into a second season. So hard. And also I know that Islanders drafted another defenseman last year. He was like a big bangers guy. Aitchison, I think. Yeah.
Kayshawn
Aitchison. So now they have another defenseman, which, hey, a team can't have too many defensemen. We're just talking about the San Jose Sharks. Malte Gustafsson goes 13th overall. Any fantasy value here? Gustafsson went 21st overall in our Dynasty League. So again, another guy who fell compared to his IRL draft position. What do you think about Malte, which is a pretty cool name? Also, I didn't mention Tynan Lawrence. That's a name. Tynan. I hadn't heard that one before. So we should be clocking these new names as we go through.
Yeah, I remember there was that I don't know, it was a Twitter account or something that collected all the interesting WHL names and how many different variations of the name Braden, Caden, Jaden, all these kind of names. And so, you wouldn't be the first person to be commenting on some of these names, but certainly Malte Gustafsson is an interesting name, and he's interesting for more than just his name. And I'll answer your question with a question here, Elon, as to whether Malte Gustafsson has any value. Can I interest you in a Simon Edvinsson?
So, look, like Simon Edvinsson, I remember last season was in free agency on and off in my Cupful division. And sometimes, he'd score a goal, he'd take a couple shots, not too special for fantasy. But I know in real life that he's a huge person on the Red Wings and they need to sign him to a new contract. I'm curious to see how much he's going to sign for. But again, for a Dynasty League, I'd be like, ugh. I don't know if I want to have Edvinsson right now about to get an $11 million contract or whatever he's going to get with this crazy landscape we're in. So I'll answer your question, which answered my question, also with the question of like, would I want Simon Edvinsson if we had the option to trade let's say our first next year for Simon Edvinsson in our Dynasty League? Would we take that? I don't think we would.
Yeah, I don't know. It's a tough question to answer, and it depends on your league settings, right? Like I'm in a league with I co-manage a league with a team with Victor in the League of Extraordinary Fantasy Gentlemen, where we did acquire Simon Edvinsson just because he raises the floor of our defensive output, right? Like he's a guy, and same with Malte Gustafsson. I'll tie it back to him here. He's a guy who's going to be involved on both ends of the puck. He can shoot, he can hit, he can block, he can get involved defensively. He's certainly adaptable, and the Isles will need him to be adaptable because their defense is a huge mess right now. Lots of guys past their primes with 3+ years left on their deals, and barring a trade, which, by the way, I am hearing a trade is likely from New York. The New York Islanders are probably going to trade out a defenseman at some point before the beginning of this season, because they've got Pelech, Pollock, Mayfield, and Romanov, who are all on long-term contracts, and all of them are kind of getting to the past their prime point here. And so that's going to be a big problem for the New York Islanders cap. So Gustafsson is going to have to be a little bit adaptable coming into the league because I don't think they're going to trade all of those guys. And while he has played a little bit on the right side of the ice, he is best deployed on the left. And so I do think that eventually you're going to see Malte Gustafsson within 2-3 years playing in that Isles top 4. And he will give you contributions, the likes of a Simon Edvinsson, but you're right. He won't get top power play time with Schaefer around. But, who knows? Anything can happen. He could get traded to another team and he could flourish in another role. And I think, as we look at the league right now and how the cap is going up, I think we're going to start seeing a lot more of these prospects changing hands because they're going to have more valuable, like a Malte Gustafsson right now even to the Toronto Maple Leafs, like to look and add something in their, young defensive core of the caliber of a Malte Gustafsson. There's a lot of teams in the league that would be interested in this kind of a player. And the Isles, they'll be pretty happy that they have him, I think.
Yeah, I mean, if you're saying that he's potentially an Edvinsson, then I know that's really huge for a team. Just because, Edvinson's like a first pairing defenseman who they're relying on for huge minutes and big contributor there for sure. But okay, so let's go now to the Columbus Blue Jackets. So Oscar Hemming goes 14th overall. Apparently, like as he was being picked, it was announced that Marchenko is not playing. Like it was dropped that Marchenko's not going to resign or something. So kind of like put a little damper on that pick. Not a fun offseason if you're a Blue Jackets fan. I guess Werenski eventually wrote a letter saying that actually he's happy to be there. So at least you have that to hang your hat on. But Oscar Hemming did go 18th overall in our Dynasty draft. So a bit of a fall from his 14th overall IRL. Is there upside here in fantasy for Oscar Hemming coming off a season in the NCAA, 8 points in 19 games. But again, like we've talked about a few players that you're excited about, even though they didn't put up big numbers in college.
Yeah, I mean, again, I'm going to give him credit for forcing his way to North America with BC. I understand it was a bit of a difficult conversation with his former team to let him kind of out of that agreement so he could go play in the NCAA. He wasn't a guy who really proved himself well. He will do better next year, but I still don't think that there's a ton of fantasy upside here in standard points leagues. I think at his peak, he's going to be the kind of guy that you stream in and hope for the best. He can play center. I know that he's listed in some places as a winger. I'll be interested to see what becomes of him next season. I would say that one of the things that I like about players going to the NCAA is usually that they were elite or spectacular offensively at the under level, where they came from. I don't think Hemming was necessarily that way. And so I'm expecting to see him take a big step in college this year. And then I'm open to seeing how he does with the Cleveland Monsters when he eventually makes his way to the AHL. But either way, I think we're looking at kind of a middle six contributor here and one that doesn't have a ton of fantasy upside.
Okay, good to know. Off air, what do you think, Ryan, in terms of, do you want to go for like another half hour or so, or do you want to like kind of wrap it up here and then come back in a week? Like kind of what are you thinking? Like I'm good to go longer, but up to you. Like,
yeah, I can go longer. The Anaheim, this next section is going to be huge because Anaheim did a lot in the draft and it all rhymes. So I think there's a lot we could talk about here with Anaheim. So I could go for Anaheim, could get into St. Louis. I don't know, but we probably stop before 20. Does that track
that works
to you?
For me? Yeah. Okay, so I'll do an ad break and then we'll come for a final section here.
Great.
Okay. So, let's take another break. We're going to come back with another player who was taken before our Albert Schmitz pick at 12th overall. We have one player left we haven't talked about that was drafted before. We were like, we just got to trade for Schmitz here. It's getting too deep. And we'll get to him in just a sec. So at 15th overall, the Anaheim Ducks were very busy, of course, because they didn't originally have this pick, but they wanted the pick, and the St. Louis Blues wanted Mason McTavish. Match made in heaven. The swap was made, and then Anaheim, apparently, and the word is afterwards that the main reason they made this trade is because they saw that Nikita Klepov was still available, and that's who they ended up taking. Klepov, who, by the way, was taken at 11th overall in our Dynasty League. 10th overall in the Dynasty League. Then 11th overall was Ryan Lynn, and then we took Albert Schmitz at 12th overall. So is Klepov like in Anaheim is a team who on one hand we're like, this is the most exciting young team out there. They have so many high upside guys. On the other hand, we're like, oh no, they're paying Leo Karlsson all this money. Are they going to be able to keep all of these people? Which maybe makes it really valuable to have another guy just starting a potential ELC in a year or two in Nikita Klepov, coming off a year where he had 97 points in 67 games in the OHL, which is huge. But again, I know that I shouldn't trust OHL numbers too much. What do you think about Nikita Klepov on the Anaheim Ducks here?
Elon, I think a lot of Nikita Klepov, and it's Klepov, or sometimes you'll see Klyepov, which is Klyepov. There's a lot of different spellings of his name.
That's the Shesterkin effect, where sometimes people are like, why do you keep saying Shesterkin? It's spelled Shesterkin. I'm like, I read somewhere that it was Shesterkin. So if I say Klyepov, I don't want anyone getting mad at me and saying that I don't know how to read.
Right, exactly. It's Klyepov, and I think that's how we'll say it here. But the thing you should know, you mentioned, yes, 97 points and 37 goals with Saginaw. A huge season for him. This is a guy who plays offense. He doesn't play defense, but he's so skilled offensively that the teams that he's on, they're like, you go ahead and do your thing, man. We'll take care of the defense, right? And Klepov is a very interesting player. I have to share, Elon. I don't think I told you about this the other day, but there's a guy, like one of the things of the people in the Scouching patron community is that they sometimes do their own ranks and they'll post them. There is one guy, and I don't think he's like Klepov's dad or anything, but he has Klepov number 1. Like that's how high he is on Klepov and the skill.
Wait, number 1, like above?
Number 1, above like McKenna, above Stenberg. Yeah. Now that's maybe a little bit crazy, but Klepov can score and he can do it very well. And it's even more interesting, Elon, because he has an interesting contract status that I want to kind of share with the listeners here. He, for a long time this year, was ticketed to go to Michigan State next year. He had confirmed that he would be going there. And it was announced on July 25th that his entry-level contract had been signed, which means he can't go to college because once you have an NHL contract, you're not eligible to play in college anymore. And so he was supposed to go to college, and now he's going to try and make the NHL team. And it kind of got out there that Dan Milstein, his agent, had basically determined with Anaheim, Klepov is an option for the NHL team this year. And so he's going to try and make the Anaheim Ducks this year. And so that should move him up your draft board, I think. And the reason why I think Anaheim is comfortable to do that is they took a very similar player, much higher, in Beckett Seneke a couple years ago, and he proved to be an excellent player for them this year. And yes, he's not great defensively, but when you're playing on a line with Leo Karlsson, or even if you get to play with Mikael Granlund, who's a very solid defensive player, or you get insulated by a guy like Chris Kreider or Alex Killorn, there's enough guys around who can take some of the responsibility from you. And again, you're playing, you got Jackson Lacombe behind you. Like, there's enough insulation here that would make Klepov a very interesting piece, kind of like a Gavin McKenna. So it's going to depend, obviously, on if he makes the team. So keep an eye on training camp and all that. But this is a player archetype that Anaheim has been looking to add. And there's going to be an opportunity for him. I think it's interesting when you look at Anaheim's first 3 draft picks. I think it's Marcus Nordmark and then Mathis Preston. I think they went at like 28 and 50. All 3 of those guys rhyme with Klepov. Klepov, they're all kind of this offensive only archetype. They can score a lot of goals. They have a lot of confidence. I think this is maybe a good instinct by Klepov to maybe get ahead of some of those other guys, because he can see as well as anyone else watching this draft that the Anaheim Ducks are looking for a skilled forward that they can play in offensive only minutes, play on the power play, keep insulated, with the likes of a Leo Karlsson, to be kind of a foil to the Cutter Gauthier. So they have more than just one kind of elite offensive piece. Cutter Gauthier, you'd never mistake him for a defensive player either. But I think Anaheim feels like they have enough quality in their system that they can have other guys take on that defensive role and have a guy like Klepov or Preston. Maxime Massé is someone who's in their system right now who's that as well. They've got Eric Nilsson coming up, who is more in the defensive realm, but that's a guy who will definitely be able to calm things down if a Nikita Klepov gets off, if he's kind of cherry picking at the blue line kind of thing. So I think that there is room for Nikita Klepov in the Anaheim Ducks roster, especially with Troy Terry's injury now. He's not going to be back for a little while. And so I think like you could see an early season burst from a guy like Nikita Klepov.
Interesting. And yeah, you know what? This is a team that traded Trevor Zegras for Ryan Poehling. So they've eaten their lunch, they've eaten their vegetables, got their defensive player. They signed AJ Greer. So why can't they have some fun and have an offensive only guy now to make up for it? So that's very interesting. If you say he has a chance to make the team, it'll be fun to see where he goes. Like, I see an open spot in the top 6 with Troy Terry injured. The big offensive names I see on the roster are like Karlsson, Gauthier, Kreider, Granlund, Seneke, and then like who? Nobody. Like, really, for next season. Like, why can't a Klepov be a top 6 left wing to start if he makes the team? I don't know. Who else would it be?
Definitely. I mean, you're not putting Sam Colangelo in that role. You're not putting Nikita Nesterenko in that role. You're not putting Ryan Poehling in that role. So there is a spot here. And I think this is probably the conversation that Dan Milstein and the NHL team were having, was like, who are you going to play in that spot? Like, Maxime Massé is maybe not ready for that. And you don't really have anybody else. And Nikita Klepov can come in, and it's all about expectations, right? Like, I think the expectations set with Trevor Zegras, because he played center, was that he would become this kind of two-way. I don't know how you could watch Trevor Zegras and be like, oh, that guy, we'll make him our defensive center. But, Klepov is coming in with the expectations of being an offense-only guy. He's going to be someone, and he's going to be coached by Joel Quenneville, who will impart some knowledge to him on the defensive side of the puck. He certainly won't let him get away with, sloppiness in the offensive zone, for instance. He's going to try and get him to maintain possession and all that kind of stuff on the cycle. So I think there's some development that can be had for Klepov here, but I think he's more than ready to play a sheltered offensive role at the NHL, and certainly better than a Sam Colangelo, who might have to step into that role if Klepov doesn't pan out.
I'm getting excited about this guy. We should try to trade for him. But I guess another name, though, in Anaheim that I want to get your take on then is Roger McQueen, who you haven't mentioned when you were talking about all these other players they have. He was taken 10th overall, I believe, last season. I know it was like there were big concerns last year about he had a back injury. Like, is he like going to be able to ever overcome that? Looks like he played some games last season. 36 college games. Is that a full season? I don't even know how many games they
Yep.
play. And you go, okay. So is Roger McQueen someone who's on your radar at all to potentially challenge for that top 6 roster spot or a roster spot on Anaheim?
Yeah, well, I mean, why do you think they felt so comfortable trading Mason McTavish for Nikita
Right.
Klepov?
True.
Right?
True.
Like they were not liking what they saw of Mason McTavish, and he has a very long-term $7 million AAV deal, and if he's not someone who can be relied upon on both sides of the puck, then the strategy of having a Nikita Klepov doesn't really make sense, because then you have a whole line of players that are an offensive liability, and you can't get anything from those guys. And so trading Mason McTavish, who they had fallen out on, and bringing in Nikita Klepov in that same kind of role, but on the wing, that makes a lot of sense, only if you believe that Roger McQueen can make the team this year. And I think they believe that he can. I think, maybe it's the kind of situation where he starts as the third line center, but he has all the bona fides to be a second line center in the league. I will say Roger McQueen last season was one of the few players who I didn't say was a third line center. I think he is a second line center with upside for more. Obviously on this team with Leo Karlsson, no chance, right? But I think he's got the size, he's got the skill, he's got two-way responsibility, and he's a great player, like a good player you want to play with, right? So that's a 2C for me. And so whether he's the 2C right now, I don't know. I don't think the Anaheim Ducks are going to want to have that many rookies in some of those important roles, but maybe it's the kind of thing where over the course of the season, him and Granlund kind of switch places, and maybe by the time Anaheim's in the playoffs, maybe you have Roger McQueen on the second line. Maybe he's playing with the likes of I think they're probably going to have to move one of Killorn or Kreider, but whichever one doesn't get moved, and then maybe you have him on there with Nikita Klepov or Beckett Seneke, and you're pretty happy with that.
Yeah, Anaheim's another team, kind of like San Jose. Like, I'm really curious to see what they're going to do next year. They're also like the anti-San Jose, where San Jose was accumulating all those defensemen, and Anaheim was like kind of having to shed them. We're looking into next year. They have Jackson Lacombe, of course. Then they extended Pavel Mintyukov 5 years times $7.2 million, where it's like we don't even know if Mintyukov is like a good, like reliable defenseman. But I guess we'll find out. Obviously, they think he is if they gave him that contract. And then I'm looking at Puckpedia right now, the rest of the defensemen on Anaheim for next year. We're looking at Nick Jensen, who's always injured, Ian Moore, Drew Hellison, Tyson Hines, Tristan Luneau. So that'll be fun to follow, like the big year after they had to match that Leo Karlsson offer sheet. But okay, that's not the purpose of today's show. Though we are on Anaheim, though, you did bring up Nordmark, who did get taken at 28th overall, and you're saying he's another offensive guy, and then 50th overall, Mathis Preston. Are you into either of these guys in a dynasty league to maybe, justify not having defensive ability, but being, I guess, high-end offensive guys?
I'm into one of them, and it's not the one that's drafted higher. It's not Marcus Nordmark. It is Mathis Preston. And you're going to see, if you're someone out there who's drafting in Dynasty, you're going to see the name Mathis Preston come up a lot. And there's good reason for that. Preston is a very exciting player. Who was a top 10 pick entering the season. This is where this player was expected to go in the top 10 of the 2026 NHL draft. He has an explosive shot. He's very fast. Neither of his WHL teams this year were particularly strong, and I think a player like Preston needs quality around him to deliver at his peak. Unfortunately, he didn't have that on Spokane. They traded him to the worst Vancouver Giants team that they've seen in a long time. And so he didn't have a lot of great players around him. And most of the nights that you see Preston playing, he'll get the puck, fly down the wing full tilt, and fire from anywhere in the offensive zone. He doesn't give his teammates much of an opportunity to join the rush and doesn't show much awareness to get inside or create better shooting up lanes for himself. When you compound that by, an inconsistent motor and physical engagement, he has nights where he doesn't achieve very much. And so for a guy like Preston to make the jump to the NHL or to any pro league, he needs to find a way to use his teammates more. He needs to play more of a team style game, force defenders to commit to him, and then put on the brakes and get the puck over to somebody else. He's going to need some help doing that, but there's no denying the skill that this player has. And I think if he can figure it out and if he can prove that he's coachable, then I think that's a very interesting piece for Anaheim, who fulfills a lot of what they're looking for with Klepov. Where Nordmark comes short from that is he doesn't have that ability to be coachable. There is an interview out there with Nordmark post draft where, and I love this question. It's one that Victor Nuno often asks players when he's interviewing them at the draft. What is it that you think you need to work on? And basically, Nordmark's answer was something to the effect of, I don't really need to work on anything. I'm just going to keep getting my offensive chances. And that is not what you want to hear if you're an NHL team drafting a player like Nordmark. He's also very weak from a physical standpoint for a player of his stature and has no motor to speak of. So he has significant trouble imposing his will in puck battles and contributing on the defensive side, which will make him not an NHL coach's favorite player. So he often, like Preston this year, fades into the background. And I think there's a real chance Nordmark becomes a kind of Arthur Kaliyev kind of player, which is like a winger with offensive tools that are easily NHL caliber, but finds himself in the AHL because he can't play the team game and he can't improve on the defensive side of the puck. If he can figure that out, there's a chance he becomes a top 6 contributor. But again, I think out of the 3 guys that Anaheim drafted for that role, in a Klepov, a Nordmark, and a Preston, I think he is the least potential to get to that kind of ceiling. Preston's kind of my guy, and I kind of saw him in the same realm as a Klepov. It's kind of hard to project him, but there's the projection I heard at the beginning of the season that I kind of still agree with is William Nylander. And so if Bathurst Preston can sort it out, like if he can figure out how to play the team game, which Nylander had to figure out too, by the way, like Nylander, he had a lot of the pedigree that comes with having a father who is in the NHL. I think if he didn't have that pedigree and didn't have the opportunities that come from being that guy, maybe you see him go as low as a Mathis Preston. But then, that's why we get sometimes like these players like Lane Hudson that come from the second round and absolutely dominate the NHL. I think Preston can do that too, but it just depends on if he can take the next step in his game. I wish he would go to college next year. Like, I don't think he's going to. I think he's going to stay with Vancouver, and we'll see if he can kind of make the changes in his own game to make himself a more NHL-ready player. But I have a lot of time for Mathis Preston.
Kind of reminds me of last year, Ivan Ryabkin. Remember him? Like going into last season, people were saying he was going to be a high pick, and then he just like totally fell. Like also, I think to the second round in the end. Yeah,
he has similar character concerns to Nordmark for sure. And the thing is, if I may, Elon, I know Brian's not around. He's a bit of an asshole too. Like Ryabkin is not like he's not a good person to be around. Like this is what I've heard. It's all rumor, obviously, but he has some real. People talk about character concerns, and it covers kind of a whole swath of sins. I do think that Ryabkin is not kind of like who's that Vegas guy? Trevor Connolly. Same thing. I don't think that either of those players are particularly good teammates, and I don't think that works in the NHL.
You think you got to work on that. Nordmark, I mean, come on. When you were saying this thing about his answer, it's like that's the common interview question. What's your biggest weakness? You just have to BS. You just say something like, I work too hard. I don't give myself enough time to refresh. Like, just come up with something like that. We've all done it, right? All right. So anyways, I guess we've covered a lot of ducks here. We probably should wrap up soon, but I guess we're already working our way through to the top 20s. Let's see how far we can get here. I think we're going to have to bring you back, Ryan, for a second half. Like, there's just so many other players. Like, we really did have a big divergence at this point in our draft of just like IRL versus where these players were drafted. Like Mathis Preston, by the way, went 22nd overall. Let me see how many picks we've gotten before we get to someone else we haven't talked about yet. So it was McKenna, Stenberg, Reed, Bjork, Malhotra, Carols, Cullen, Verhoff, Lawrence, Klepov, Ryan Lynn. Then we got Albert Schmitz. Then Daxon Rudolph, so he fell even farther than Schmitz did. Actually, the next pick is someone who we haven't talked about, and the next one after, and the next one after that, and the next one after that, before finally Oscar Hemming went. So we still have some names that at least in fantasy, in a very competitive fantasy league, people are very high on. So let's keep going here. Actually, this next player, IRL, Maddox Dagenet, was not one of the people that I'm saying were taken after Daxon Rudolph in our draft. So St. Louis, they took Tynan Lawrence. They had a pick a couple picks later. They took Maddox Dagenet. I don't really know much about this guy. I know that he hasn't been taken too high in drafts. Actually, where was Dagenet? He was taken 29th overall in our Dynasty League draft. Do you think that was just like a fair assessment of his value?
Yeah, I think 29th is fair. I think anything sooner than that is kind of hopium. He's I think the definition, at least from what we saw in Quebec, of a perimeter player. He doesn't necessarily have a nose for the net. He certainly moves well for his size, but he'll need that extra pep in his step to contribute higher up the lineup. I think he's going to compete for a middle 6 spot with the likes of McTavish and Lawrence, but I think it's more likely that he gets kicked to the wing. I don't think that he is someone who can handle the responsibility of being a center, even a third line center. And I think someone of those three is going to have to play 2C, and I think he's the least likely to play that role. I could see him playing as a winger. I think one of the projections that I see here. There's one that's way too high, and that's Matthew Nyes. I don't think we're looking at a Matthew Nyes here with Maddox Dagenet. Another one is Alex Tuck. Again, I think a lot has to go well for Maddox Dagenet to be Alex Tuck. The one that I think I agree with from elite prospects is Zachary Bolduc. I think he's probably like a lower end middle six player who can give you some offensive pop, but he's not going to be a play driver. He's not going to be someone who, you can rely upon. Maybe Nyes is the ultimate of upside projections, but he's going to need to develop he's going to have to find a way down that golden mile, down the slot. He needs to get into the play a little bit more to have anything close to a Matthew Nyes. And I just don't see it. And if he's continuing in Quebec next year, he's not going to take that step that I think a lot of us would need to see.
Right. By the way, Dagenet was acquired. That pick was acquired in the Jordan Kyrou trade. It was Kyrou for McMichael, Gastron, and this pick where they took Maddox Dagenet. So obviously, St. Louis would love if it works out, just to help make up for the sting of losing Kyrou. Though they kind of don't care about Kyrou anymore. They were already like, Snuggerud's our new Kyrou. We don't need Kyrou. Next up, Ethan Belchez, who was taken 17th overall in the draft by the Utah Mammoth. This was a pick that they got from LA. I'm seeing was like a first pick swap in order to. So LA traded down in order to get another pick in the third round. Okay, well, we'll see if they'll regret that, because I've been seeing also some good things on Twitter. You could tell me if this is like something I should just be ignoring, but apparently Belch has had a couple good goals in some of these World Junior Champion tryouts. This is a guy who was taken very high. He was taken 14th overall by the inaugural season champion, good old Ottawa Boys team in our Dynasty League. And it seems like Utah could use I think they have a lot of really exciting players, and I guess you add another high pedigree forward to the mix. So what do you think about Ethan Belchez here, left winger?
Yeah, I mean, I think the best comparable already exists on Utah, and that's Lawson Krause. And you'll remember Lawson Krause was drafted, I think, in the top 5. Maybe he was 6th. I'm not sure, but pretty high in the draft when he came into the league. Elite prospects said it best. Every NHL team dreams of adding a player like Ethan Belchez to their lineup, or at least the player that he could become with the right developmental program. He's big. He's got skill that is comparable to many of the top forwards that are available in this draft. Unfortunately, he had a bit of an injury to his shoulder earlier this year, which cost him some of his season. But if he's able to kind of come back and be the player that I think a lot of us expect him to be, I think you're looking at a very interesting piece of the middle six in Utah. And certainly he could be a guy like Lawson Krause that ends up in the top 6 based on what the coaching staff is looking for from the line. Maybe it's the kind of situation where someone like I would have said JJ Peterka, but he's gone now. Maybe he fills a similar role to that kind of a player. Maybe when it's time for Belchez to be a player in the NHL, maybe he's on the wing with a Tija Ginla, and he's able to kind of be a foil in the same way that a Chernyshov is the foil to a Celebrini. Not that a Ginla has Celebrini upside, although he is an excellent, excellent hockey player who will play in the top 6 in Utah. Maybe Belchez is a good foil to that kind of a player with the shot that he has and the ability that he has to, drive play. I think, we talked about Maddox Dagenet and how he's not Matthew Nyes. I think Ethan Belchez could be, closer to a Matthew Nyes type of player. And he's one that I'm very high on, certainly.
And by the way, when you make that Lawson Krause comparable, I think some people would be like, oh, okay, so nothing much. But actually, if you recall, Lawson Krause had a pretty good season in fantasy last year. I think that people are forgetting that he was like rosterable in Cupful for a lot of the season. Ended up with 44 points, but you combine that with like really good hit numbers, decent shots, even almost 2 shots per game. Krause not too bad. But we'll see. Obviously, Dagenet's not going to be necessarily Lawson Krause, but sounds interesting.
Yeah,
He's going to be close to Nyes.
I'm looking down the list here. One of the great things about the Elite Prospects Guide is they'll include actual quotes from NHL scouts that they talk to. And this is a quote from August 2025, but there was someone who was comparing to James Van Riemsdyk. And again, I think just the kind of, player that he is, the downhill speed, the rushing offense, I think you could see a very similar player like a James Van Riemsdyk. And James Van Riemsdyk is a guy who's been around for a long time. A lot of people forget he was an elite kind of shooting threat for maybe 6-7 years of his career between Toronto and Philadelphia. So that's a player who, if you end up having a career like James Van Riemsdyk, pat yourself on the back, because that's a very good player to be.
Yeah, especially if you can get it 17th overall here. We're also getting a fun history of like all the recent trades that have happened. Like we go to the next player, 18th overall, and Washington had Oliver Suvanto. How did Washington get this pick? That's the pick they got when they traded John Karlsson to Anaheim at the trade deadline. And it was for a first, which ended up being this pick, and then a third next year. So we'll see who that turns out to be. Oliver Suvanto, another center. He was not taken too high in our Dynasty League draft. He ended up going 33rd overall. So is this going to be like a Maddox Dagenet, where you say that's like fair value and he's maybe better in real life than in fantasy?
Well, Elon, I think one of the things we talk about.
Let's retake it because you moved your mic and it made a sound as you.
Elon, one of the things we talk about sometimes in evaluating prospects is which teams draft these players. And I'm always pretty high on players that are drafted by Washington. They just seem to uncover gems, whether it's an Andrew Cristall or, name a Protoss, either of the Protoss brothers. They have been very good at unearthing these kind of players, especially later on. So, I'm big onto the Washington prospect, pipeline, the same way that I like a New York Islanders prospect pipeline, a Nashville Predators prospect pipeline, or a Carolina Hurricane prospect pipeline. Any of those teams, if they draft a player, I am interested. And I'm certainly interested in Suvanto. I don't think that he has, I think if you look at a guy like Dylan Strome, who's on Washington right now, I think that that's maybe the upside projection that you could have for a guy like Oliver Suvanto. But you have to remember, Dylan Strome became Dylan Strome after having a higher upside and kind of failing to reach that upside. For Oliver Suvanto, it's going to be a little bit different in that he has like a definite bottom six center upside, like projection right now. Like I think Oliver Suvanto, give him a year or two, I think he'll probably be playing like a 3C or 4C role for Washington. But I think that there's a lot of potential for him to grow beyond that and to become kind of a, maybe he's not the, dynamic offensive presence, but he can definitely, drive play in the same way that a Dylan Strome can. Elite Prospects has him projected as being similar to Jordan Staal or Adam Lowry. Both of those guys have played up the lineup in their careers in the 2C position. And so it just really depends on how some of his other parts of his game develop. But certainly from a passing and handling standpoint and from a physical standpoint, that is an elite part of his game. He needs to kind of upgrade his skating, and I don't think the shooting will ever be kind of elite NHL caliber. But if he can work on some of his, development cases, I think there's a real potential here for a 2C, but he'll have to work to get there.
Okay, so definitely a name to keep in mind. You like a Chicago, or mind, you like a Washington Capitals draft pick, so Oliver Suvanto, let's remember him. So then, remember I mentioned that Utah traded up to get Ethan Belchetz at 17. The team they traded was the LA Kings, so I guess we're okay to go down a couple picks and then also net an extra third because I guess they were going to be happy getting their guy Elton Hermanson, who they ended up picking 19th overall. He's someone who I've been familiar with over the past few weeks because I had a second round pick in my other Dynasty League. Well, I had traded all my other picks, and this was the one pick that John and I had held on to. And as the pick was coming up, I remember I was sitting at my daughter's swimming lesson in a very hot room where I don't know why they need that room to be so hot, but she was in this pool. I'm like dying of sweat. It's like our pick. And I was like chatting with John who we should take. John, I believe, wanted Command. I was messaging with you, Ryan. You were saying, like, I was telling you who's been taken, and it was like 22nd overall. You're like, oh, Hermanson's still out there? You should go with him. Then I was going back to John Reed, and I was like, John, Ryan said we should take Hermanson. Then John was like, well, look at Hermanson's numbers. They're not that great compared to like a Command or some other people. Then I went back to you, and Ryan, you were like, well, the classic thing we've talked about, right? He's been playing against men versus like these other people playing in the CHL. You ended up convincing us. I'm happy. Well, I hope that I'll be happy that you did. We took Hermanson, and I guess we'll find out if the LA Kings are happy that they traded down to get their guy Hermanson. But remind us and help convince me again why he's a good guy to grab and why you think that this is a good pick.
Yeah, to make my point here on Elton Hermansson, I first have to give you a little bit of a history as to how Swedish professional hockey works. And so, yes, we have the Swedish Hockey League. That's the top division of professional men's ice hockey in Sweden. And then you have below that the Hockey Allsvenskan. And I think the easiest way to think about them is if you're a soccer or a football fan, you have the Premier League and then you have the Championship League. And so teams get promoted or relegated depending on how well or poorly they do in the SHL, and they end up in the Hockey Allsvenskan. And so actually, one of the most storied Swedish hockey franchises, Modo, Hockey Moto is the team that Elton Hermansson plays for, and they are currently, undergoing relegation into the Allsvenskan. So they've been there for some seasons now. But yes, it's second division pro hockey, but it's still pro hockey. Everyone's getting paid. These are all men playing professional men's ice hockey. And so, yes, the quality is going to be a little bit less, but it's not that much less. And so, yes, he is playing against men in the Hockey Allsvenskan on Moto. It's more competitive than your typical North American minor league because the clubs are all independent and can earn promotion. So Hermansson, if Moto played very well this year, could be playing in the Swedish Hockey League, and I imagine he would perform very similarly as he did this year. The reality is he played at a very high level of competition at 17. So I'm expecting him this season to dominate as a key player on Moto coming up in this season. I think obviously he would have gone higher if he did the same on an SHL team, but still great form for a 17-year-old. And he will also, I should say, have a starring role on the World Junior Championship team. He's got a lot more skill to his game than other players that have been drafted from the Hockey Allsvenskan, like Jonathan Lekkerimäki or Noah Ostlund. He's maybe not a guy like Pasternak or Elias Pettersson or Nylander, who also played in the Hockey Allsvenskan at the top of his projection, but I'd be very comfortable projecting a William Eklund type outcome for Hermansson if he continues to develop.
I mean, that's not so bad for a guy they got at 19th overall for sure, compared to where Eklund went. And LA, maybe this is like, I don't know if this is good or bad. Like the fact that LA doesn't have too many interesting prospects. They've drafted some guys that haven't worked out over the years. So maybe that's a sign that this could be another one, or at least there is space for a Hermansson to come in and become I think if you were to he must be their top he must be their top prospect in the system right now, right? Like a 19th overall pick, but who's a higher pedigree prospect than Elton Hermansson in LA right now? I'm trying to think of who it would be.
Yeah, I think you'd have to look in net, right? I think they have a lot of really good goaltending prospects. Right. You have Carter George. You have Portillo, Eric Portillo. You have the other one whose name is very confusing. What is it? Hampton Slukinski. They traded Liam Greentree to New York this year. So yeah, I think if you're looking at who their top kind of skater prospect is, I think it has to be Elton Hermansson. And when he gets his opportunity in the NHL, I mean, look at LA right now. They have a very clearly defined top six, bottom six. I think there's plenty of room for Hermansson to come in, especially if he gets to learn from a guy like Adrian Kempe, a countryman of his, probably a hero of his growing up. I know they all love William Nylander. All these Swedish guys who come up, their favorite player is William Nylander. I'm sure that this guy's got some time for Adrian Kempe for sure. So, I think definitely Hermansson, when he's done in Swedish hockey, maybe he comes over. I don't even think he'll spend that much time in the AHL. I think it'll probably be right to the NHL when he's ready.
Yeah, okay, so definitely not a name to forget. Obviously not going to be around next year, but got to pay attention to. Let's clear out the top 20, and then we'll wrap it up for today. This is a fun history of how the Buffalo Sabres ended up with this pick. So it was originally Edmonton's pick, and then they made a trade, if you recall, to get Jake Wallman from San Jose. And if you recall, San Jose got Jake Wallman. They got a pick to get Jake Wallman. Because Detroit just wanted to dump him so bad. And then he went to San Jose. Jake Wallman was actually really good. I remember for fantasy, Jake Wallman was killing it in San Jose as their top power play defenseman. But then Edmonton traded a pick, which was this pick, to get Wallman. Then San Jose decided to use the pick to get a defenseman, Michael Kesselring, from the Buffalo Sabres. And now this pick goes to Buffalo. And Buffalo takes Ilya Morozov, who is a center, yet another center. Are we just going to be talking about another third-line center? Or do you have some time for Ilya Morozov here going to the Buffalo Sabres? Better than the Daxon Rudolph pick in your mind?
I have a little bit of time for Ilya Morozov. Elon, just to bring it back a little bit, that same guy who had Nikita Klepov number 1 had Ilya Morozov number 2. So I think that should tell you everything you need to know about this particular projector. I think Morozov, it's an interesting player. I don't think there's a lot there offensively. He's a gifted defensive forward. He plays physically. He can forecheck on the puck. He has net front skills. He'll be a garbage man kind of guy. He's an easy kind of projection to a middle six center, same as Suvanto as like a Jordan Stahl or an Adam Lowry. Where him and Suvanto differ is I don't think Morozov has that 2C upside. I don't think we'll be seeing him as like an early career Jordan Stahl. I think he's more of a late career Jordan Stahl, where he will be very good on the defensive side of the puck. And, unless he can develop a little bit more on the offensive side, I think that's what you get. He is another one of those guys, by the way, who played as a 17-year-old in the NCAA. As you know, I have a lot of time for that. But again, I don't think he necessarily dominated at his lower level. And it'll just be something to watch this season, how he plays in college. And if he can take a step offensively, I don't think it's in the cards necessarily for him. But certainly from a defensive standpoint and a physicality, I think it's very clear what Buffalo is trying to go for here with this kind of player. And that is, someone who can play in their bottom six and stabilize that position.
Yeah, I mean, Buffalo is pretty set with young, exciting players for the top six, so it makes sense just to shore up maybe some depth there. So we'll see how this pick turns out for them. At least it's like a low ceiling, but maybe a higher floor than some other guys. So that takes us through the top 20, and we already talked about Ryan Lynn, who went to the Sharks with the next pick. So that's the top 21. I think we got to wrap it up here, but this has been so much fun, and we still have so many players to talk about. Like when I go back to our Dynasty draft, like I said, 13th overall was Rudolph. Then Belchet's at 14. Then we still have guys we haven't talked about yet. JP Hurlburt went at 15. Liam Ruck at 16. Adam Novotny, 17. Then 18 was Oscar Hemming, who we've talked about. Then Hermanson at 19. But then Xavier Villeneuve went 20 to close out our first round. So we have some fun names. So I think we got to come back, do this again. Maybe we're going to not have as many people to talk about as we're getting out of the first round here. But maybe also if there's any patrons who have any prospect questions, you know how I was asking about like a Roger McQueen or some other guys from last year's draft. If you have a question about a prospect, I'm sure Ryan would be happy to tackle it. So Brian, I believe, is still on vacation for another week. So we have time before Brian comes back to put another prospect episode out with Ryan. So just hit us up in the Discord in the episode discussion channel if you're a patron of any other questions for Ryan. And I think we'll come back in a few days and finish this draft and maybe also tackle some other stuff. I'll probably also have a bunch of questions I could throw at you, Ryan, since I have you here captive to answer all of my questions. But okay, thanks so much for coming on. This has been awesome. Anything you want to plug before we take this out of here?
Yeah, it's my pleasure. It's always great to be on Keeping Karlsson. Nothing really to plug, I guess, except, keep listening to Keeping Karlsson, keep listening to Fantasy Hockey Life. We're about to start our tiered dynasty draft. If you're a patron of Fantasy Hockey Life and you're looking for an extra dynasty to be in next year, I know that we're building the wait list out, and we tend to go pretty deep into the wait list during the year. We get some attrition just because it's an undertaking to be a part of a tiered dynasty league. And so some people decide it's not for them. Certainly, if that is you, reach out to me and I'll put you in contact with the right people to get you over there. Also, feel free to read the 2026 Dauber Fantasy Hockey Prospects Guide. A lot of work went into that this season. Both myself and Victor Nuno wrote on it this year. I wrote for the San Jose Sharks and the Nashville Predators, and I believe Victor wrote for the Detroit Red Wings. And I want to say Utah, but the only way you can be for sure is if you pick up a copy of that 2026 Dauber Fantasy Hockey Prospect Guide. We go probably 15, 16 players deep. And certainly that particular guide, we're talking about, what they could look like for fantasy hockey. So certainly people like Victor and myself definitely lean more in that fantasy realm than maybe some of the other writers. So if anything, pick it up for our insights on some of those players. A lot of work went into it, and we're pretty proud of it.
Nice, yeah. And by the way, Dauber also released his actual fantasy guide for the season. So I think they have a package there where you can buy the prospect guide and their regular guide. You can go to Dauber Hockey and check that out. I don't think I'm supposed to mention Dauber Hockey at the start of the show. Keeping Karlsson, probably presented by Dauber Hockey. So yeah, check out that website and those guides. Thanks again, Ryan. Again, I will mention the Keeping Karlsson Ultimate Patron Fantasy League. The deadline to register will be September 1st to guarantee your spot. And if you played last year and you earned a division, a tier, let's say you won your tier 5 division, and so now you've earned your way up to tier 3, you still got to register so that we know you're in, because some people don't come back, just like you said about how there can be some people that don't return for the tiered dynasty. Same for the cupful. So just make sure you get registered. We're going to keep mentioning it every episode. And if you're not a patron, if you didn't play last year, guarantee your spot. You'll start in tier 6 and you can start your climb. It's a lot of fun. So again, keepingkarlsson.com/patron to become a patron of Keeping Karlsson, which gives you a ton of perks, our fun Discord community, and then also access to our awesome Keeping Karlsson Ultimate Patron Fantasy League, where yours truly going to be in tier 1 next year. I clawed my way back. Ryan is in tier 2, I believe.
Tier 2. Yep, by the skin of my teeth.
yeah, you had to win your constellation playoffs in order to hang on to that spot. So kudos to you, and that'll be fun. I wonder, there's a decent chance that in 2 seasons we could be playing against each other, either both in tier 1 or in tier 2, or potentially in tier 3 if we both have a bad year next year. So that'll be fun either way, I think. I've been in tier 3. It's not that bad. So being relegated, not the worst thing in the world, actually, because then it feels good when you get back up to the top again. But okay, blah, blah, blah. Thanks so much for listening. Make sure you subscribe to Keeping Karlsson so that you'll get part 2 of this series with Ryan Downey about the draft and about prospects in general. So wherever you get your podcasts, you know how podcasts work. Thanks for listening, and we'll be back soon. Have a great night. See you, everybody. That's my outro. So good.
There you go. Perfect.
And thanks for the live viewers, anyone who watches later on YouTube. Ryan, it's been a blast.
Yeah, won't be me this time because I am here right now, living it.
Hey, you're not going to want to rewatch? See, like, well, what you're happy with? What you want to take some notes?
Well, I'll definitely listen to it. I wondered if you would mention that I had listened to your 3-part series with Brian like multiple times because I did. I mean, anyone who's out there like this, you would know. Of course, you're a patron. This is the best resource anyone puts together coming out of the draft and coming out of trade deadline, free agency. Going through all the teams and all the fantasy relevant information. I might even listen to it one more time.
Oh, wow. Well, you know what? Actually, I don't think we ended up sharing the notes. Like, I have notes on every team and all the moves they made. Maybe I got to share that with the patrons. We're supposed to do that. So if Brian hasn't done that, someone remind me if I forget. But yeah, I'm going to go and share. I do have for every single, I'll tell you a team. Look at this. New Jersey added Barrett Hayton, David Riddick, Evan Rodriguez, Jesper Boqvist, and then they lost Jacob Markstrom, Samuel Nemec. I've got details about how this all happened. The nice thing about the episode is, of course, then Brian also gives his opinion about the fantasy value of these guys. But yeah, it was an undertaking just to keep track of all of this. Used game day tweets, of course. But anyways, I could talk about this stuff forever. We should go for another beer. I wish I had a beer right now.
Yeah, let's go right now.
I walked to the beer store. I was thinking, like, because we were talking about how maybe it would be fun to have a beer while we record this. Closed because of Civic Holiday. Come on. I'm sure someone's willing to work at the beer store. Give them time and a half. Give them double time.
It's because it's run by the government, Elon. It's the government job, the beer store. I went to the Summerhill Market, which is not run by the government, and they were open. So I was able to get some food for dinner today. But yeah, beer store, good luck. LCBO, good luck. It's a government job.
Yeah, I ordered pizza from Pizzaiolo. It was also open, thankfully.
Yeah, not run by the government.
Okay, I guess I need to keep in mind. You know what? And I did go to grocery shopping earlier in the day, but I just didn't think about how the beer store wouldn't be closed. A pleasure, Ryan. See you, everybody.
Bye, everybody.
Just hang on, just in case after I end the stream, just to make sure the audio uploads. Okay, I'm gonna click it now. Bye.